Mom, why are you holding a criminal? What? A criminal? Confused by my daughter's words, I looked at my husband, Andrew, who had turned pale and was approaching us. He quickly grabbed the baby clothes off Kevin's stomach and tossed them into the nearby trash bin. Wait a minute. Just as I was about to scold Andrew, my smartphone rang, and it was my mother-in-law, Melissa. Did the baby gift arrive? I hope it's not that creepy kid this time, right? The moment I heard her voice, everything clicked into place. The package wasn't just from Melissa. It was sent under the name of Kayla, my grandmother-in-law, and from the way she talked, it seemed she knew about my daughter, Alice's spiritual sensitivity. In other words, she was declaring war on us. If that's how she wants to play, then I have my own plans. I've been holding back for so long, but if she's going to insult my adorable daughter, I won't stand for it. No matter how much she cries and pleads, I will never forgive her. I'll bring her crashing down to the very bottom. I clenched my teeth in anger. My name is Sarah. I'm 33 years old and worked at my father's company before I got married. His company runs a franchise business. It mainly focuses on restaurants. I'd like to return to work one day, but for now, my family, which was formed 5 years ago when I married Andrew, is my priority. Andrew also works for my father's company, and we met at work. He's a serious man, and I fell in love at first sight. Our relationship has been great, and soon after we got married, Alice was born. My life is nearly perfect, but there's one big issue. My in-laws, especially Melissa, she has held hostility toward me from the very beginning. Maybe I made a bad first impression. That was what I thought. Everything started from our first meeting. The first time I met Melissa was during a family meeting at my in-laws' house. Of course, I had nothing to feel guilty about. Andrew and I had planned everything out carefully, so I was confident when I faced the family meeting. But then something unexpected happened. It was right after we announced our engagement. I suddenly noticed something strange about Melissa. Melissa, are you feeling okay? Oh, what do you mean by that? Well, you look a bit pale. Although I mentioned that she looked pale, that wasn't exactly the case. The truth is, I have a peculiar ability. I can see people's colors. When someone is unwell, they appear in dark colors. And when they are healthy, they appear in bright colors. However, I can't tell what specifically is wrong or what the cause is. At that moment, Melissa appeared in a dark hue, so I assumed she wasn't feeling well. But since it was our first meeting, I couldn't really tell her the truth, so I chose my words carefully. However, it seemed this upset her. Melissa suddenly frowned, looking irritated, and spoke in a displeased tone. You too say strange things, don't you? Too, I echoed. She sneered and continued. Yes, just like Andrew. Like Andrew. I glanced at Andrew. He averted his gaze, looking uncomfortable. Before I could figure out what was going on, Melissa turned to me and asked, "Don't tell me you see strange things too, do you?" Andrew's been like that since he was a kid, always claiming to see things that aren't there. She started ranting abruptly. According to Melissa, Andrew had been able to see things that others couldn't since childhood. She didn't know what those things were, but Andrew used to say he saw people when no one was around. Melissa found Andrew's ability creepy, and now she was asking if I was the same. No, I just thought you looked a bit unwell, I stammered, trying to explain. But Melissa wasn't having any of it. In the end, under her relentless questioning, I ended up confessing that I could see people's colors. You're just like him. How creepy. That's not what I. Shut up, get out, never come back, Melissa yelled, driving us out of the house. Left with no choice, I left the in-laws' house. As we stood outside, Andrew apologized to me, looking guilty. I'm sorry, Sarah. Why are you the one apologizing? Well, I hid the fact that I have this ability, like a kind of spiritual sense, Andrew said, lowering his head in sadness. I linked my arm with his. We're both guilty of that, aren't we? I didn't tell you either. Still, with the way Mom is, I'm worried about our marriage. It'll be fine, I said, though the thought that Melissa would oppose our marriage flashed through my mind. However, Andrew's father, Joseph, hadn't said a word. If Joseph could be on our side, I decided to cling to that faint hope. After discussing it with Andrew, we decided to meet with Joseph in secret, without telling Melissa. We arranged to meet at a nearby family restaurant, one operated by my father's company. Since Andrew had work and couldn't join, I was alone, feeling nervous. When Joseph arrived, I'm sorry for calling you out like this. It's no problem. I happen to be off today. Joseph works for a security company, and today was his day off. His availability reassured me just a little bit. So the reason I called you today is, it's about the marriage, right? I'm not against it, Joseph said, smiling as if he was in a good mood. I was taken aback by how easily he said it. However, Joseph went on to explain that, as expected, Melissa was against Andrew and me getting married. But he added that it wasn't impossible to convince her. When I asked for more details, Joseph said, she's greedy when it comes to money. I think you can sway her with that. When we visited Andrew's family home, I had mentioned that my father runs a company. Melissa apparently hadn't forgotten about that. So, Joseph suggested we could leverage that point. But how exactly should we go about doing that? As I pondered, Joseph made a suggestion. Why don't you treat her to a meal at the restaurant? You could also offer to take care of her mother. I see. If you can show her that there are benefits to the marriage, Melissa might come around. If we get married, the daily life of Andrew's family wouldn't change. In fact, there are advantages to the marriage. If we could prove that, Melissa might accept our marriage. That made sense. So I decided to give it a try. The first thing I did was treat Melissa to a meal, though all I did was invite her to a family restaurant. Melissa, it's on me today. Even if you're treating, it's just a family restaurant. Yes, but this restaurant is run by my father's company, I explained. Melissa kept a dissatisfied expression the entire time. However, when it came time to order, she started requesting dishes one after another. I'll have this, and also this one, please. Oh, all right. Understood, I replied and hurried to the kitchen. In the end, Melissa ate enough for several people. As she was leaving, she said to me, I'll come again. Make sure you're ready for me next time. And about our marriage, I'll think about it, she replied, then walked away. It goes without saying that I continued my efforts after that. For example, I began taking care of my grandmother-in-law, Kayla, something Melissa had been doing until then. However, Kayla, despite her age, could do almost everything on her own. So rather than taking care of her, it was more about visiting her a few times a month. Every time I visited Kayla, she would look at me apologetically and say, "You're not even married yet, and you're doing all this." I come to visit because I enjoy it. My own grandmother had passed away long ago, so visiting Kayla gave me a sense of nostalgia. I found it comforting, and soon I began visiting her house frequently. "Well then, I'll put in a good word for your marriage too," Kayla eventually said after my many visits. With Kayla's persuasion, Melissa finally approved of our marriage. However, even after the marriage, visiting Kayla remained my responsibility. Shortly after, Alice was born. It became difficult to continue working, so I ended up leaving my job. But more than the job, I was worried about one thing. What if Alice didn't like Kayla? What if she became fussy and caused trouble during our visits? These anxieties lingered at first, but in the end, I was overthinking everything. To my surprise, Alice developed an interest in the various antiques that Kayla had collected as a hobby. Because she wanted to talk with Kayla about those antiques, Alice started looking forward to our visits. I felt more at ease by the good relationship between Alice and Kayla. Time flew by, and soon Alice was 4 years old. One day, when we went to visit Kayla, Melissa happened to be there as well, which was rare. After leaving Alice in Kayla's care, Melissa called me into the kitchen. "Melissa, is something the matter? How much money do you have?" "Huh, how much?" I was taken aback. Melissa quickly pressed her index finger to her lips, signaling me to lower my voice. "Keep your voice down. Be quiet." "Oh, I'm sorry. Listen, about that." Melissa began speaking with a stern expression. Her story went back a bit. Joseph had just retired at the age of 65. I knew this and had already sent a congratulatory gift, but that wasn't the issue. The real problem was that my in-laws had almost no savings. They would start receiving their pension, but living off just that would be difficult. They had asked Kayla for financial support, but she declined, saying she was struggling herself. Can you believe it? A mother abandoning her own daughter. She's the worst. Anyway, that's why you and Andrew should start sending some money. What? That's all I could manage at the moment was to say, "I'll discuss it with Andrew." As soon as we got home, I immediately talked to Andrew. With a sigh, he responded, "I had a feeling this would happen. For now, I'll send them some of my savings." And just like that, we started sending money to my in-laws. However, it didn't take long for Kayla to figure it out. When I visited her house after that, she said, "I hear you've been sending money to Melissa." I quietly nodded. "Yes, it seems they're having a hard time. They've always been so terrible with planning." Being Melissa's mother, she clearly understood her daughter's situation. "I'm sorry for burdening you both with this." "It's all right." But deep down, I was filled with anxiety about the future. There was a possibility we'd continue to be taken advantage of. However, if we stopped sending money, Melissa would surely get angry and accuse us of abandoning them. Isn't there any better solution? My face naturally hardened as I thought about it. At that moment, Kayla gently patted my head. Then she spoke kindly to me. "Making such a serious face like that will only worry the baby inside you." "Huh? Baby inside me? Oh, you didn't notice. You're pregnant, dear," Kayla said with a smile. I widened my eyes in surprise. I hadn't noticed any major changes in my body, nor had I realized I was pregnant. "Pregnant, me," I murmured. At that very moment, Alice, who was beside me, turned to me and said, "The baby says he's here too." "Right here." Alice gently stroked my belly. At that moment, I finally became aware of the fact that I was pregnant. That very day, I went to see an obstetrician. After an examination, it was confirmed I was indeed pregnant. "Alice, how did you know?" I sighed. I was taken aback by her words. Could it be that Alice has the same abilities as us? I can see the colors of people, and Andrew can see things that are invisible to others. It wouldn't be surprising if our daughter, Alice, had a similar ability. For now, I told Andrew about Alice's words and the fact that I was pregnant, but because Melissa was around, Andrew insisted that we keep Alice's abilities a secret. I agreed with him, and so Alice's gift became our little family secret. As my belly began to grow, I started visiting Kayla's house less frequently. Even though I was worried about her, I became frustrated that I couldn't visit as often. It was around that time I received a call from Melissa, informing me that Kayla had been hospitalized. Apparently, Kayla had been in poor health. Given her age, I couldn't help but worry. There wasn't much I could do, so I had no choice but to rely on Andrew and the others to take care of her. Soon, my due date was approaching, and I was admitted to the hospital for the delivery. Then, one night, I received a call from Andrew. Kayla had passed away. While I was in the hospital, Kayla's funeral had already taken place. As soon as I'm discharged, I would visit her grave. With those thoughts in my heart, I prepared myself for the labor. Maybe Kayla was watching over me as I had an easy delivery. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. We decided to name him Kevin. 3 days later, a package arrived at the hospital addressed to me, sent in Kayla's name. No way. Even this. Inside was baby clothes for a boy. We hadn't told Kayla the gender of the baby, and yet, somehow, she had known. Andrew's abilities were undoubtedly inherited from Kayla. Filled with emotion, I held Kevin in my arms and tried the baby clothes on him. "They suit you perfectly," I whispered. Just then, Andrew and Alice entered the hospital room. "Mommy, where's the baby?" "He's right here," I replied, showing Kevin to her, dressed in the baby clothes. But at that moment, Alice's face suddenly grew puzzled. As I asked what was wrong, Alice said, "Mom, why are you holding a criminal?" "What? A criminal?" Before I could make sense of it, Andrew, looking pale, rushed over. He grabbed the baby clothes off Kevin's belly and threw them straight into the trash can. "Wait a minute." As I was about to scold Andrew, my smartphone rang. It was Melissa. "Did the baby gift arrive?" "Hopefully. It's not for another weird kid this time, right?" The moment I heard her voice, everything clicked into place. The package wasn't from Kayla after all. It had been sent by Melissa using Kayla's name. And judging from her tone, it seemed like Melissa knew about Alice's spiritual abilities. This was clearly a declaration of war. If that's how she wanted to play, I had my own plans. I've been holding back for so long, but if she's going to insult my adorable daughter, I won't stand for it. No matter how much she cries and pleads, I will never forgive her. I'll bring her crashing down to the very bottom. I clenched my teeth in anger. I turned to Andrew and asked, "Andrew, what did you see?" It was Mom trying to do something to Kevin. Andrew muttered quietly. I nodded and then gently asked Alice, "Alice, why did you say criminal?" "Because, Mommy, you were holding a criminal." "Who's the criminal?" "It's not Kevin, is it?" I asked softly. Alice fell silent for a moment, then, answering in a small voice, "Grandma." So it was Melissa. Suppressing my rage, I continued to ask Alice, "Why do you think she's a criminal?" "Because she stole something," Alice replied sadly. I listened carefully to Alice's story. She had seen Melissa stealing something. There was no need to ask where. It had to be at Kayla's house, the only place they'd had contact. In other words, Melissa had stolen something from Kayla's home. However, it didn't seem like Melissa's theft had anything to do with revenge against me or Kevin. And the baby clothes Melissa sent were store-bought. So what was her real motive? That's when it hit me. There was something else in the package. I quickly rummaged through the remaining items in the bag. It was just more baby clothes, except for a small piece of paper at the very bottom. When I read it, I realized it was a Bible verse. In shock, I tossed the whole bag into the trash can. This wasn't an appropriate message for a baby gift. The verse clearly evoked thoughts of a funeral. I needed to rethink this situation. Was Melissa angry that Kevin had been born? If she bore malice toward Kevin, what could have triggered it? For now, I decided to ask Alice some questions. Melissa had clearly indicated that she knew about Alice's spiritual abilities. and I was certain it was connected to all of this. As I listened to Alice, I learned how Melissa had discovered Alice's abilities. It happened shortly after my pregnancy was confirmed. That day, I had left Alice in Kayla's care while I went out shopping, just running some errands in Kayla's place. Apparently, Melissa had shown up at Kayla's house. During that visit, Alice had innocently said to Melissa, "Grandma, do you have a cold? Just feeling a bit under the weather." "How did you know? You were a different color than usual." For Alice, it was just a casual remark, but it must have reminded Melissa of something I had once said to her when we first met. Alice had said something very similar to what I had said. Melissa likely concluded that Alice was also a weird child, so that's why she did all this. I now understood why Melissa had taken these actions. If that was the case, there was only one thing left for me to do. I asked Alice about the item Melissa had stolen from Kayla. If I could find out what it was, Melissa wouldn't be able to inherit anything from Kayla's estate. That would be the ultimate revenge on Melissa, who was obsessed with money. At the same time, I asked Andrew to search for evidence. Months passed, and finally, the discussion about Kayla's inheritance took place. Kayla's estate was supposed to be divided between Melissa and her brother, Jason. However, for some reason, Andrew and I were also summoned by the lawyer. We headed to Kayla's house, where Melissa and the others were already waiting. "Oh, even you two came." We were summoned. "So where's the precious grandchild?" Melissa scanned the room. Trying to suppress my irritation, I replied, "Kevin is with my parents." "Oh, what a shame. I was so looking forward to seeing him." Though her expression showed no sign of disappointment, I glared at Melissa, holding back my rising anger. Soon after, the lawyer began explaining Kayla's will. Kayla's estate was surprisingly large. She had a house and land, several valuable antiques, and even a significant amount of cash. According to Kayla's will, the estate had already been allocated. The house and land were to go to Jason, while the cash and antiques would go to Melissa. However, there was a high-end painting Kayla owned, which was to be left to Alice. "Why, a great-grandchild has no right to inherit." "What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with leaving something to her grandchild. But, after all, if it were a stranger, it might be one thing, but Alice is Melissa's granddaughter. To not want to pass on an inheritance even to a granddaughter. How greedy can one be?" I couldn't contain my anger any longer. Eventually, when the conversation paused, I exchanged glances with Andrew and began to speak. "By the way, I hear Melissa has been stealing here." "Huh? What are you talking about?" Melissa replied, irritated. At the same time, Jason looked puzzled. "Were you stealing from your own mother's house?" "I don't know anything about that." Melissa pretended to be unaware. So I pressed further. "Alice said she saw you." "Melissa, don't believe what that creepy child says," Melissa shouted, her voice rising. At that moment, Alice's eyes welled with tears. I sighed. "Shut up, be quiet," Melissa yelled. Suddenly, Alice fell silent. Instinctively, I pulled Alice close to me. I then exchanged a glance with Andrew, who noticed my cue and placed his smartphone on the table. "Here, we have something that was borrowed from the neighbor." "Huh? What do you mean?" "There's a video of the cat that lives next door," Andrew said seriously. At that moment, Melissa burst into loud laughter. "A cat video? Is everyone supposed to enjoy that?" "No, it's actually footage from a pet camera. Your mother is in it." This was from a few days ago. Andrew had gone to Kayla's neighbor's house. He asked if there had been any unusual happenings at Kayla's place. The neighbor said they had seen Melissa repeatedly carrying things out for quite some time. Moreover, the neighbor had recorded the footage several times on the pet camera. and confirmed that they had kept the recordings. So I borrowed that footage. Wait a minute. That's... Melissa panicked. Jason was looking at Melissa with suspicion. Did you take it without permission? That's not true. She asked me to take care of it. Melissa struggles to come up with an excuse, but Andrew steps in, delivering the final blow. Excuses are pointless. I've already confirmed that you sold the items on your own. What? I even got a copy of the resale records from the shop. Andrew places an envelope on the table. Inside the envelope were the records. He points to the paper as he continues speaking. It clearly lists Mom's name as the seller. You sold vintage furniture and jewelry, among other things. That's them. Come on, just admit it. Andrew raises his voice, and Melissa, startled, trembles. Then suddenly, she bursts into tears. It's not like that. We were struggling to make ends meet. Andrew's been sending money, hasn't he? It wasn't enough. I'm sorry. Melissa collapses to the floor, sobbing. After that, Jason starts interrogating her, pressing harder. Little by little, Melissa begins to talk. Here's her story. After Joseph retired, their financial situation became dire. Melissa asked Kayla for help, but she was refused. Then she turned to us. That allowed them to get by, but they didn't have any money to spend freely. That's when Melissa set her sights on Kayla's antiques. If she sold them, she could get some cash. She discussed this with Joseph, and after that, every time she visited Kayla, she started taking valuable items. And when Kayla began to notice things going missing, Melissa came up with the idea of having Kayla admitted to the hospital. The plan was to get her out of the house temporarily and take as many valuables as possible. But before Melissa could act on this plan, Kayla's health actually declined, and she was hospitalized. From that point on, Melissa had free rein. She took more and more items, including cash, and even had Joseph transport the larger pieces using his car. There's footage from the neighbor's pet camera showing them during one of those trips. I checked earlier, and there's a significant reduction in the number of antiques. As per the will, they'll be mine anyway. I just took them a bit earlier than planned. Melissa snaps back defiantly. To that, I said, are you claiming it as an early inheritance? If that's the case, you'll owe some taxes. Taxes? No, I mean, Mom asked me to sell them for her. Yeah, that's it. Then where's the money? When I asked, she tried another excuse. I used it to pay her hospital bills. But isn't that amount way too high for just hospital fees? I also bought supplies and spent it on other things. You've got no right to complain. Melissa raised her voice in frustration, and at that moment, Alice spoke in a small voice. Great-grandma. She's angry, you know. Angry. Melissa turned to Alice. Alice nodded and continued. Yay, she's angry. She says you should just admit what you used the money for. What are you talking about? Stop saying weird things. Melissa started sweating nervously, clearly flustered. Seeing this, I asked Alice, do you know what the money was used for? To pay off debt. Great-grandma says that's what it was for. Paying off debt. How? I glared at Melissa. Melissa, clearly irritated, started biting her nails. Sounds like you had quite a lot of debt, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Then what about these? I tossed a stack of overdue notices onto the table. The story goes back a few hours. Before we came to Kayla's house, we went to the in-laws' place. Only Joseph was home at the time, so we decided to interrogate Joseph first. We showed him the evidence, piece by piece, the same evidence we later presented to Melissa. Overwhelmed by the pile of evidence, Joseph quickly got tired of making excuses. He eventually confessed that he had accumulated a significant amount of debt from gambling. He also admitted to working with Melissa to steal from Kayla's house. As we continued talking, we found out that Joseph knew about Alice's psychic abilities. And without any shame, Joseph said, "Why not use those psychic powers to win at gambling?" It goes without saying that I was furious. Andrew's anger, though, far surpassed mine. "I'm reporting you for theft, Dad." "Wait a second, you're going to turn in your own father." "You're my father." "But that doesn't matter. If you don't want that, pay back everything you stole." Faced with Andrew's raised voice, Joseph shrank in fear. In the end, he promised to repay the full value of everything he had stolen from Kayla. So after we made Joseph sign a written agreement, we took the overdue notices and came here. I spoke calmly to Melissa, who was staring wide-eyed at the pile of notices in front of her. No need for excuses. For now, just renounce your claim to the inheritance." When I told her that, Melissa scowled. "Why? That has nothing to do with this. If you renounce it, you can use that money to pay back what you owe. Either way, you'll have to return what you stole." Melissa fell silent at my words. That's when Jason raised his voice. "Enough already. One way or another, you're going to have to pay it back. But if you don't, we'll just report you to the police for theft." "Which will it be?" "Take your pick." Considering it was theft among family members, it was likely that she would be spared from any legal punishment. However, the social stigma would be unavoidable, not to mention the distancing from other relatives. Perhaps all of this was racing through Melissa's mind, because soon after, she deeply apologized on the spot. "All right, I'll give up my claim to the inheritance," she said in a quiet voice. Following that, the lawyer present facilitated the inheritance procedures, with Melissa officially declaring her announcement of the inheritance. Formal proceedings were set to take place in the coming days, and so the contentious inheritance discussion that had involved us all came to an end. "Well then, let's head home. Kevin is probably waiting for us." "Hey Alice, why don't we go pick up that painting you got?" Andrew stood up with Alice, but for some reason, Alice resisted. "What's wrong, Alice?" "Wait. Not yet." "Great-grandma's." Alice pointed to the corner of the room. I looked over, but I couldn't see anything. However, it seemed Andrew could see something. He smiled and nodded at Alice. "All right. Do as you like, Alice." "Yay, thank you." After saying that, Alice walked over to Melissa, who was still apologizing. She gently tapped her on the shoulder, and in a quiet voice, she said, "Great-grandma says there's something for you, Grandma." It's in the shed." Alice pointed to the far corner of the yard, where an old shed stood. The shed. What could be in there? I knew about the shed, of course. In fact, I had taken cleaning tools from there when we tidied up the garden, but apart from those tools, I hadn't noticed anything else in there, and I couldn't imagine anything valuable being placed in an outdoor shed like that. "In the shed." "Yeah." She says to open it quickly. Andrew nodded, so it seemed that, though I couldn't see it, Kayla really was there. It was a strange situation, but it left me feeling a warmth in my heart. The shed. The shed. Melissa bolted from the living room and threw open the shed's doors. And in that instant, "No way. There are coins in here." Melissa's scream echoed through the air. Startled by the sound, Alice covered her ears. "I did it. I can pay off my debt now." Melissa's voice rang out again, but this time it was a scream of pain. She collapsed in front of the shed. "Melissa, what's going on? What happened?" I instinctively shielded Alice. Meanwhile, Andrew rushed over to Melissa. Soon, he turned back to me, speaking in a hushed voice. Sarah, call a taxi. What happened? I asked, alarmed. Amidst our conversation, I heard Melissa's voice again. Why? Where are the coins? Where did they go? Looking closer, I noticed her hand had turned red. Beside her was a large centipede. It looks like the centipede got her. It hurts. Where are my coins? My coins. Melissa kept muttering deliriously until the taxi arrived. Afterward, we checked the shed, but there were no coins to be found. What exactly did Melissa see that made her believe there were coins inside? We never uncovered the truth, and then, even stranger events followed. After taking Melissa to the hospital and bringing her back home, we found Joseph at their house with a strained back. On my way back from the convenience store, I found a wallet stuffed with cash. He explained that he hurt his back while trying to pick up the wallet, but by the time he looked again, the wallet had completely disappeared. There hadn't been anyone around either, he said. In that moment, Joseph realized it was Kayla's punishment. As he told us this story, Alice softly muttered something to her grandparents. Great-grandma says you need to straighten up. She's always watching you. Upon hearing those words, both of their faces turned pale. From that point on, they became unusually quiet and subdued. Nowadays, the two of them work part-time jobs. They plan to return all the money they got from selling Kayla's antiques to Jason. It feels a little strange how compliant they've become, but they're terrified that Kayla will visit them in their dreams if they don't. So they said there's absolutely no way they can quit. That's what they told us. It's likely guilt weighing on them. But since it's working, I've decided not to say anything. As for me, I've been living a slightly more relaxed life than before. Now that I no longer have to check on Kayla, I've gained some extra time. Still, I don't have enough energy to return to work yet. Taking care of Kevin is more than enough to keep me busy. And of course, I still worry about Alice. I glanced over at Alice, who was enjoying her afternoon snack. What is it, Mom? Alice, doesn't it bother you seeing things that others can't see? I'm happy because I get to see Great-grandma. Look, she's right over there. She pointed toward the veranda. In that moment, I heard a voice. It's okay, I'll always be watching over you. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I was certain I heard it. Kayla's familiar, gentle voice. On that quiet afternoon, I couldn't help but smile.
Rochelle. Congratulations on starting middle school. Charla, my son's wife, beamed with pride as she celebrated our granddaughter Rochelle's achievement.
Thank you, Charla.
Charla opened her bag with a smile, taking out a box filled with freshly baked bread. You made this bread? Way to go, Charla. I clapped my hands in surprise, impressed by the seriousness of Charla, who normally didn't cook.
I thought I smelled something delicious. So you baked bread?
Harv said as he emerged from the shower, his hair still damp and a towel draped around his shoulders. He inhaled deeply, savoring the enticing aroma wafting through the kitchen. Too bad for you. Charla made this bread exclusively for Rochelle. There's none for you. I laughed as I spoke, and Harv looked a bit disappointed.
I see.
But chuckled good-naturedly, humming a cheerful tune. Charla reheated the boxed bread in the microwave and transferred it to a plate.
I made this for Rochelle, so make sure you eat it all, okay?
As Rochelle took the bread, she suddenly sneezed. Immediately, Harv abruptly reached for the plate of bread. And before anyone present could stop him, Harv tossed the bread, plate and all, into the garbage can and quickly closed the lid with a decisive thud. What on earth are you doing? How could you do something so cruel? Charla went to all the trouble to make that bread just for Rochelle. Unable to comprehend Harv's actions, I smacked his shoulder 2 or 3 times in reproach.
Nana, stop!
Rochelle grabbed my arm to stop me.
Pop, thank you.
Her eyes glistened with large, shimmering tears. My name is Bella, and I'm 60 years old. I work part-time at a local supermarket while living with my husband Harv, a civil servant. We have 2 children, but they're both independent now and have started their own families. Our son, Roland, rented an apartment within walking distance of our house, where he lived with his wife, Charla. Charla was a full decade younger than Roland.
Nice to meet you, Bella. I'm Charla. It's a pleasure.
When Charla was first introduced to us, Harv and I exchanged surprised glances.
Charla, our son is over 30. Are you sure about this?
Harv asked with concern, but Roland immediately retorted, with a laugh.
What's that supposed to mean?
Observing their interaction, Charla smiled.
I was a bit anxious at first, but seeing what a fun family you are puts me at ease.
Well, if you're okay with a family like ours, we'll be counting on you for the long haul. Harv and I quickly accepted Charla, won over by her bright personality and genuine warmth. According to Roland, Charla had lost her mother at a young age and had been raised by her father ever since. Her father had also passed away a year ago, leaving her with no living relatives.
That's why I want you and Dad to treat Charla like a real daughter.
Our son appealed to us with a serious gaze, and Harv and I nodded in agreement. Charla, from today onward, we'll treat you as our real daughter. And we want you to think of us as your true mom and dad.
Bella, Harv, I can't thank you enough. I'm so happy to have met Roland and his wonderful parents.
Charla's eyes brimmed with tears as she bowed her head repeatedly in gratitude. Due to his job in sales, Roland inevitably had to travel frequently for work. Whenever we had time, we would keep Charla company and engage her in conversation. Charla seemed to struggle with cooking, and when Roland wasn't home, she would always resort to buying pre-made meals from the grocery store.
That's no way to live, dear. Come have dinner at our place every night.
Wouldn't it be a bother?
Although Charla politely declined, her face lit up with a radiant smile at the invitation.
Nonsense. You're like a real daughter to us, so don't hesitate to rely on us a little. Besides, it's always just Harv and I. Having you around would brighten up our meals.
Well, if you insist, I'll gratefully accept. From that day on, Charla began having dinner with us every evening. Additionally, Charla apparently had trouble keeping her place tidy. When I went to check on my son and daughter-in-law's apartment, I found the room littered with bags full of garbage and piles of laundered clothes.
Bella! I'm so embarrassed for you to see this mess.
Charla hastily tried to shove the garbage bags and laundry into the closet. Her cheeks flushed with shame.
You need to take out the trash on the designated days. And make sure to separate it properly according to the local rules.
I went home to retrieve the community newsletter outlining the garbage disposal guidelines and handed it to Charla.
I'll come help clean whenever I have time too. Roland asked me to take good care of you. So don't hesitate to ask if you need anything.
From then on, Charla began seeking our help at every turn, her requests growing more frequent and demanding.
There are weird bugs infesting the kitchen and I'm at my wit's end. I'm too scared to deal with it myself, so please. The laundry has piled up. Can you put it away for me? My friends are coming over to hang out. So could you go shopping for me instead?
After just 3 months, Charla's demands were escalating rapidly, her reliance on us becoming increasingly burdensome. Even the mild-mannered Harv grew suspicious.
Aren't we being a bit overprotective? If she can do things herself, We shouldn't let her rely on us for everything.
His brow furrowing in concern as he voiced his reservations. Some days, my part-time job would run late, and I'd return home exhausted. Even on those days, Charla would come over as if it were the most natural thing, handing me a basket overflowing with laundry.
I showed you how to use the washing machine last time, remember? We have the same machine, so you should be able to do it at home, right?
When I chuckled wryly, sighing in exasperation.
Oh, right.
Charla stuck out her tongue playfully.
When you scold me like that, Bella, it makes me happy. It feels like I'm being scolded by my real mother.
Seeing her suddenly display a lonely expression, I found myself unable to speak any harsher words.
You're having dinner at our place tonight too, right?
Yes. Bella's cooking is the most delicious in the world.
Although I thought her phrasing was a bit over the top. I couldn't bring myself to turn away Charla when she acted so endearingly. After finishing dinner, as I was washing the dishes like usual, the landline phone rang.
I'll get it.
Charla, who had started getting ready to leave, picked up the receiver. I quickly wiped my wet hands on my apron, ready to take over the call at any moment.
Well then, I'll be heading home now. Thanks for the delicious meal today.
However, as Charla was about to leave, I hastily rushed out of the kitchen.
Who was that on the phone just now?
It was a pushy salesperson. They've been calling a lot lately, and it's really troublesome. Be careful of scams and such. They often target elderly households.
You're right. The neighbors said they've been getting strange calls too, so they've stopped answering the phone. Thanks for the warning. It's reassuring to have you looking out for us.
Definitely, let's be cautious. Well, I'll see you again tomorrow.
With a bright smile, Charla left for the night. This routine continued for about a year. In addition to Roland, we have another child, a daughter named Georgina. Georgina is just a year younger than Roland and married her high school classmate, Wesley. Currently, they live in the neighboring state due to Wesley's job. The distance is not insurmountable by car, and we understand that our daughter's family has their own circumstances. And we can't expect them to come over often just because we're feeling lonely. Nevertheless, Georgina would occasionally call to update us on their lives.
Guess what? Rochelle won the Gold Award at the speech contest last week.
Oh my, that's incredible! We should celebrate the next time you visit. Think you could make it this weekend? Well, I'm not sure. We just came for Christmas, and the next long break won't be until summer vacation.
After ending the call with Georgina, I always felt a twinge of loneliness. Georgina has a daughter, Rochelle, who is about to graduate from elementary school. Rochelle is our one and only grandchild, a precious light in our lives. She affectionately calls us Nana and Pop, her love for us evident in every embrace. Up until a year ago, Wesley would drive the family to visit us every weekend without fail, Rochelle's laughter filling our home. Watching Rochelle energetically run around the spacious yard and rush to hug us. "Oh, why don't you just stay here and never go back home?" I found myself repeatedly voicing a half-joking plea.
No way. I have school tomorrow.
Rochelle would always take my jokes seriously, replying with a solemn face that only endeared her to us even more, her earnest nature tugging at our heartstrings. Every time I recalled her adorable face, I yearned to hear Rochelle's voice without reserve.
Why don't you come visit us sometime soon?
Inviting her over the phone at every opportunity.
I'm sorry, Nana. I have cram school tests next week, so I need to study. This week, I promised to go shopping with my friends. And over the weekend, our class is going on a camping trip.
Like clockwork, Rochelle would turn down my invitations, always citing one reason or another. Feeling a bit dejected, I would hang up the phone, only to have Harv gently pat my shoulder.
Rochelle is at that age now. She must be dealing with a lot, like studying and maintaining friendships.
His smile understanding and comforting.
You're right. It seems like she's working hard too. Things can't be like they used to, can they?
I had no choice but to convince myself to accept the changing times. Although we couldn't see each other as often as before, Rochelle would still call from time to share stories about school. Watching Rochelle grow from afar became a precious connection that sustained us through the passing years. As the day of Rochelle's elementary school graduation drew closer, the end of February fast approaching, Georgina called us with unexpected news.
Rochelle will be graduating from elementary school soon, right? This year. Her spring break is longer than usual. I was thinking of bringing Rochelle to visit you this time. What do you think? Would that be okay?
You're more than welcome. I'm sure Dad will be thrilled too.
But we just visited during Christmas. Are you sure it won't be a bother?
What are you even hesitating for? As if we'd ever turn down a chance to see our adorable granddaughter.
That evening, when I told Harv about the plan, he grew even more excited than I was, his eyes sparkling with anticipation.
Of course, we'll welcome them with open arms. Why is she acting so reserved with us? This settles it. Let's throw a grand celebration for Rochelle's graduation and middle school entrance.
Harv was so overjoyed, he couldn't stop grinning throughout the entire meal.
Whoa there, Dad. You all right? Your fork's not moving.
At our son's remark, Harv snapped back to reality.
Ah, Charla got to see me acting all uncool. Forget what you just witnessed.
His cheeks flushing with embarrassment.
I'll pretend I didn't see a thing.
Charla laughed softly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. That day, Roland had finished work unusually early and was having dinner with Charla at our place.
It's the last Sunday of the month, right? I've got a business trip that day. There's an important meeting with a client, so it'll be tough for me to make it. Come on, it's Rochelle's graduation and entrance celebration. Can't you do something? Don't be unreasonable. This is work we're talking about.
Roland gave a wry smile at Harv, who always lost all sense of boundaries when it came to Rochelle.
A celebration for her entrance into middle school? That sounds wonderful. I think I'll do my best for my cute little niece that day too.
Charla suddenly declared with a beaming smile, her enthusiasm infectious.
Do your best at what?
Well, let's see. I'll cook something special.
What? You're going to cook? Are you sure about that?
I feigned exaggerated surprise, but deep down, I was absolutely delighted. Charla, who never lifted a finger in the kitchen or with household chores, had just proclaimed she would put her heart into cooking for Rochelle's sake.
It's okay, right?
Of course it's okay. Oh, I can't wait to see what kind of dishes you'll whip up.
Thank you. All right then, I'll work hard and learn some recipes for Rochelle.
Seeing Charla's determination, everyone at the table burst into laughter. Before we knew it, the day of the celebration arrived, and our daughter's family came over from the neighboring state.
Hello, Nana. We're here.
Rochelle greeted me with a slightly more composed demeanor, as she stepped out of the car Wesley had driven. When she was younger, she would fling the car door open and immediately dash over to hug me. But now that she was 12, those days were behind her.
To think that little Rochelle is already becoming a middle schooler. She's growing up so fast.
As I lost myself in nostalgia, Georgina chuckled, finding my reaction peculiar.
We just saw each other at Christmas, but you're acting like it's been decades.
Well, even a single day without seeing my granddaughter feels lonely.
It wasn't an exaggeration, those were my true, unfiltered feelings. Once my daughter's family settled into the house, I promptly began preparing dinner. On a typical evening, I only needed to cook for three: myself, Harv, and Charla. However, with the addition of Rochelle, Georgina, and Wesley, I had to prepare a significantly larger quantity of food. Without needing any prompting, Georgina readily pitched in, helping with the cooking and setting out the appropriate number of plates, knives, and forks. It was clear that Georgina's upbringing had been thorough and proper. Rochelle, too, seemed restless and kept popping her head into the kitchen.
What can I do to help?
She asked me as I bustled about, immersed in the preparations.
Rochelle, you're the star of the show today. Why don't you just relax and watch some TV?
I ushered Rochelle to the living room with a wry smile. If I didn't do this, the ever-responsible Rochelle would refuse to leave the kitchen out of consideration for me. On the kitchen sofa, Charla was sitting and watching TV the entire time.
Charla, weren't you supposed to cook something for Rochelle today?
Of course I did.
Since the moment she had entered our house, Charla had been clutching a paper bag, refusing to let go of it.
Rochelle, congratulations on your graduation. And congratulations on starting middle school.
Charla beamed at her niece, her smile radiant with joy and pride.
Thank you, Charla.
Perhaps overwhelmed by Charla's enthusiasm, Rochelle seemed to shrink back a little, her voice barely above a whisper. Still grinning from ear to ear, Charla reached into the paper bag and pulled out a box.
Oh my, you made bread? Way to go, Charla.
Although Charla had been eager to cook for Rochelle, I hadn't been informed about what exactly she planned to make. Touched by Charla's dedication, especially considering her previous lack of culinary skills, I couldn't help but applaud her efforts.
I bought a cookbook and studied the recipes. Cooking is so much fun.
Perhaps elated by my praise, Charla's voice rang out with an unusual lightness and cheer.
Let me just borrow the microwave for a bit.
With those words, Charla carried the box into the kitchen. Harv emerged from the shower, toweling his damp hair.
I thought I smelled something delicious. Did you bake bread too?
Too bad for you. Charla made this bread exclusively for Rochelle. There's none for you.
As I laughed and teased him, Harv looked a bit disappointed,
I see.
but chuckled good-naturedly.
If you'd like, I can make bread for Harv and Bella's wedding anniversary next time.
Charla returned from the kitchen, holding the box with a mischievous grin.
Now that's something to look forward to.
Harv smiled as he gazed at Charla's bread, his eyes softening with anticipation. Humming a cheerful tune, Charla transferred the bread from the box onto a plate.
I made this for Rochelle, so make sure you eat it all, okay?
Oh, it smells wonderful.
Rochelle, you're so lucky to have someone make such delicious-looking bread for you.
As Rochelle took the bread, she suddenly sneezed.
Are you coming down with a cold? You're about to start middle school.
So you need to take care of your health. No staying up late, all right? Just as I casually offered that reminder, Harv abruptly reached for the plate of bread. And before anyone present could stop him, Harv tossed the bread, plate and all, into the garbage can and quickly closed the lid with a decisive thud.
What on earth are you doing?
Unable to comprehend Harv's actions, I raised my voice and stood there.
Move out of the way!
Harv pushed past me and carried the garbage can out of the house.
How could you do something so cruel? Charla went to all the trouble to make that bread just for Rochelle.
When Harv returned, I smacked his shoulder 2 or 3 times in reproach.
Nana, stop!
Rochelle grabbed my arm to stop me. Her eyes glistened with large, shimmering tears.
Pop, thank you.
Rochelle's voice trembled as she expressed her gratitude to Harv.
Rochelle, what's going on?
Georgina, too, struggled to make sense of the unfolding situation, her gaze darting between Rochelle and Harv in bewilderment. Rochelle coughed, unable to answer coherently.
There were nuts in it.
Harv's face contorted as he spoke in a low, pained voice, a mixture of anger and sadness coloring his tone.
Nuts? That can't be true.
Rochelle had suffered from a severe nut allergy since birth. When she first started elementary school, just the scent of nuts in a candy bar had triggered a life-threatening asthma attack, landing her in the emergency room.
To think she was trying to feed Rochelle something so dangerous.
At Harv's growled words, Charla let out an exaggerated denial, her voice rising to a desperate shout.
That's not true. I had no idea Rochelle was allergic to nuts. I swear I didn't know. Please believe me.
Tears streamed down Charla's face as she frantically tried to defend herself, dropping to her knees in a pleading gesture. Stunned by the unexpected turn of events, we fell silent, forgetting to utter a single word. Just then, the doorbell rang, shattering the heavy silence that had settled over the room. The sky had grown dark outside, and a glance at the clock revealed it was past 8 p.m.
The house was so quiet, I thought no one was home.
Our son entered the room, shrugging off his suit jacket.
Roland, didn't you say you had a business trip today?
That was the plan, but the client's schedule changed, so the meeting got pushed to next week. I hopped on a last-minute flight to come here.
Roland smiled and pulled a long, thin box from his bag.
It's a personalized pen for Rochelle. I was planning to give it to her later, but I'm glad I can do it today.
With those words, Roland approached Rochelle, perhaps sensing the unusual atmosphere.
Did something happen?
Roland asked with a serious expression.
It's the nuts. Charla made bread for Rochelle, and it had nuts in it. Charla didn't know Rochelle was allergic to nuts, so...
As Harv explained the situation, Roland's face instantly hardened, his jaw clenching tight.
You didn't know? Is that what you said?
Roland looked down at Charla, who was huddled on the floor, his gaze sharp and accusing.
There's no way you didn't know. I told you countless times. Didn't I? That Rochelle has a nut allergy, so you need to be careful. In fact, weren't you the one who asked if Rochelle had any allergies in the first place?
Is that true? Charla, did you knowingly try to feed Rochelle nuts even though you were aware of her allergy?
I stared at Charla in disbelief, my mind reeling from the revelation. Charla looked up at me with pleading eyes.
No, that's not it at all. I just forgot, that's all. I sometimes make mistakes like this, and it frustrates me to no end.
She tried to brush off her actions as a simple, unintentional error. Then, Georgina, who had been silently observing the scene, spoke up, her tone measured but firm.
Charla, that's not the only thing you're hiding, is it?
Her sharp gaze pierced through Charla as she questioned her.
What do you mean? There's more to this?
I felt as if everything I had believed in was crumbling before my eyes, and I feared I might lose my sanity.
It was around the end of last year. Rochelle called to talk to Mom and Dad, but Charla answered the phone. And you know what she said to Rochelle? In a low, scolding voice. She told her, "Don't come over to play anymore." I was right beside her when I heard those words, and I couldn't believe my own ears.
That's a lie! Why would I ever say something like that?
Charla denied it vehemently, her voice trembling with emotion. However, Georgina refused to relent in her pursuit of the truth.
Rochelle wrote countless letters addressed to Mom and Dad, but not a single one received a reply. Did you read those letters, Mom and Dad?
At Georgina's question, I turned to Harv, but he shook his head in denial. Until that very moment, I had been completely unaware that such letters had been sent.
Is that true, Rochelle? You wrote letters and sent them to us?
Rochelle nodded.
And while Mom and Dad were out at work, Charla took it upon herself to retrieve those letters from the mailbox and dispose of them. Didn't she? You even laughed as you told me about it yourself.
That's another lie. I never did anything like that, not even once.
Charla denied it once more, her voice rising in desperation. Georgina walked over to the landline phone.
You see, this phone has an external automatic recording device installed for fraud prevention. Your conversation with Rochelle should be properly recorded.
With a matter-of-fact tone, she specified the relevant date and time. Then pressed the playback button.
Grandma and Grandpa are really bothered by it, you know. They find the phone calls annoying too. Rochelle, you're already in 6th grade, aren't you? Aren't you embarrassed to keep relying on them like a child? Well, I suppose I can turn a blind eye to the occasional phone call. But coming over every week is just inconsiderate, don't you think? Grandma and Grandpa are too kind to say it outright, but that's how they feel. Writing letters is pointless too. I tear them up and throw them away so they don't burden Grandma when she comes home tired from her part-time job.
Listening to Charla's recorded voice, I was overcome by a wave of dizziness.
Charla, what is the meaning of this? When did I ever say that Rochelle was a bother?
Charla merely trembled, refusing to utter a word in her defense.
Rochelle made me promise not to tell Mom and Dad because she didn't want to worry them. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after you knowingly tried to feed her nuts despite her allergy.
Rochelle, Georgina. I'm her husband, and yet I had no idea. I'm so sorry.
Roland dropped to his knees, apologizing for allowing Charla to do as she pleased all this time.
It's okay, Uncle. It's not your fault.
I don't think there's cause for concern, but just to be safe, take her to the hospital immediately.
Harv instructed, his face tense with worry. Without hesitation, Wesley hoisted Rochelle onto his back and carried her to the car parked in the garage. After watching Georgina follow them out.
For now, I'm taking Charla home today. We need to talk about what happens next.
Roland fixed Charla with a terrifying glare.
No! I don't want to go back. Let me stay here forever.
Mom, Dad, I'm truly sorry about today.
Roland apologized to us repeatedly before forcibly dragging Charla, who refused to budge, back home with him. In the end, Roland and Charla officially divorced. As for why Charla had resorted to such foolish actions, Harv and I were shocked when Roland revealed her motive.
According to her, she couldn't stand seeing Mom and Dad, who usually doted on her, prioritizing and cherishing Rochelle over her.
You can't be serious. That's why she tried to hurt Rochelle?
For Charla, who lost her mother at a young age, Mom was like a real mother to her. But Mom loved her granddaughter Rochelle even more than she loved Charla. She must have been jealous, feeling like her mother was taken away from her.
Roland's next words pushed our anger towards Charla to its peak.
She showed no remorse at all. She said we were making too big a fuss over a mere allergy. She even laughed as she signed the divorce papers.
This isn't some harmless prank that can be brushed off.
You're right. This is a crime. We can't forgive Charla for hurting our precious granddaughter.
After discussing it among the three of us, Roland took a doctor's medical report to the police and filed a criminal complaint against Charla for assault. Upon her arrest, Charla admitted during the investigation that she had deliberately mixed nuts into the bread. Now, detained in a holding cell, Charla awaits the day of her trial. However, regardless of the verdict handed down to Charla, we will likely never see her again. Rochelle, now a middle school student, is happily sweating it out with her teammates in the softball club. On a day with a pleasant autumn breeze, I find myself at Rochelle's middle school.
Grandma, did you see me hit that ball?
Rochelle flashes me a carefree smile, unchanged from her childhood days. On that fateful night of her graduation celebration, if Harv hadn't realized Charla's true intentions, we might never have seen Rochelle smile again. Thanks to Harv, who saved our precious granddaughter from crisis in the nick of time, Rochelle's future is now protected.
Grandma, what's wrong? You've been staring at my face for a while now.
It's nothing. I was just thinking about how adorable you are. No matter how many times I look at you.
What's that? Don't say weird things.
It's not weird at all. You are our irreplaceable treasure. When I said this with a serious face, Rochelle averted her gaze, looking a bit embarrassed, and ran off to join her friends.
She says she wants to be a nurse in the future. Apparently, the nurse at the hospital we rushed to that time was so calm and reassuring. Rochelle found her dream for the future, wanting to become someone like that. I guess it wasn't all bad.
Georgina spoke as she watched her daughter, who had grown so strong and resilient.
Is that so? I was really worried after what happened. Rochelle is a tough girl, isn't she?
I, too, will do my utmost to support and protect Rochelle's strength, to be there for her and help her as she moves forward into the future.
Don't you dare show up at my college entrance ceremony next month, you fake mom.
Alan, my husband Scott's son from a previous marriage, told me bluntly, not even trying to hide his displeased expression. As he shamelessly devoured the celebratory meal I had prepared for his acceptance, Alan clicked his tongue at me, unable to conceal his shock at my appearance.
Why are you so surprised? You even showed up uninvited to my high school graduation. People thought a woman with your saggy body was my mom, and it was humiliating for me.
Alan spat out venomously, recalling the recent high school graduation ceremony. It was true that I wasn't Alan's real mother, and my husband Scott and I are 8 years apart. But that's precisely why I had tried to be considerate. Sure, I had been exhausted and maybe my dark circles were showing, but I had even gone to the beauty salon to get dolled up. I couldn't have looked bad enough to warrant such hurtful comments. Even if Alan wasn't my biological son, it was my only son's graduation. I had rearranged meetings and business deals, somehow managing to take the day off to attend, and yet this was how he felt about me. It made my heart sink. Moreover, Scott, who should have defended me, instead crudely laughed at the sight of Alan attacking me.
Well, I guess there's only so much a makeup can do. She's an old woman after all. Seriously, for someone working at a trading company, having her around must really bring down the efficiency of the people around her.
Scott and Alan gradually got more and more animated, talking about how ugly and old I had become. Aging is a natural process that everyone goes through, yet they mocked it as something hideous and looked down on me. Ah, this marriage was indeed a mistake, I realized once again with a pang. I've always had terrible luck with marriages. My first husband had easily cheated on me, and after the divorce, I had remained single for a long time. As I approached my mid-50s, feeling a sudden longing for companionship. I had been enjoying a drink at a bar after work when Scott happened to sit down next to me. Apparently, Scott too had been cheated on and had just gotten divorced. Perhaps because we had that in common, Scott and I started frequently meeting up at that bar. Before I knew it, I was being introduced to Scott's son Alan. A high school student aiming for medical school, Alan seemed to take after Scott in his politeness and diligence. I decided they were the family I wanted to become a part of. I had thought that after making the big decision to remarry, a warm family life would be waiting for me. But gradually, they started draining my salary while treating me like a housekeeper. It was only then that I realized I had been thoroughly ensnared in their intricately woven spider web of a trap. Like a trapped butterfly, perhaps struggling was futile. But was this really okay? Was I really content to let these men, who didn't even see me as human, say whatever they wanted about me?
That's going too far, even for you. I retorted, unable to contain my anger for once. Shut up. Are you gonna lecture me again? I told you to stop acting like you're my mom.
Alan raised his voice even louder at my rare display of backbone. As Alan saw the tears welling up in my eyes, he clicked his tongue in annoyance.
Seriously, why did you even marry a woman like this, Dad?
Put on the spot by Alan's pointed gaze, Scott's shoulders jumped in surprise before he hurriedly tried to appease his son.
Sorry about that, Alan. Come on, Carol, you apologize too.
With those words, Scott tried to push my head down in a forced bow. This was ridiculous. Why should I have to apologize?
Fine, I get it.
Saying that, I stood up from my seat. Then, on the day of the university entrance ceremony we had been waiting for, they were confronted with a shocking revelation from the school administration. Due to the $12,000 in unpaid tuition fees, your acceptance has been revoked.
What?
My name is Carol. A 55-year-old woman working at a trading company. I'm fortunate to hold the position of Director of Corporate Planning, allowing me to live comfortably without financial worries. I was married once in my 30s, but that ended in divorce due to my ex-husband's infidelity. For a while after that, I threw myself into my work. But about a year ago, I happened to meet Scott at a bar I had stopped by on a whim. He had taken the seat next to me at the counter by chance, and as we got to talking, we discovered that we had both been cheated on and divorced, finding a sense of camaraderie in our shared experiences. Before long, we started seeing each other outside of the bar as well. Scott was 47 and, to my surprise, worked at one of my company's client firms as a sales manager. He had a son, Alan, who was in his third year of high school. Almost without realizing it, the three of us started having meals together frequently. Alan was aiming to become a doctor and was constantly studying for the brutally competitive entrance exams. Yet, he never seemed bothered about taking time away from his studies to have dinner with us. On the contrary, he was a polite and upstanding young man. I suppose he took after his father Scott's courteous and hardworking side. It was only natural that the fondness I felt for them steadily grew stronger and stronger. After meeting up as a trio so many times, I found myself wanting to support Scott and Alan however I could. So, when Scott proposed, I gladly accepted. Remarrying in my 50s, I was too embarrassed to wear a wedding dress, so we didn't have a ceremony. But with Scott being a sales manager at one of our client companies, both of our firms celebrated with a grand reception party. I likely wouldn't be having any children with Scott, but I had Alan who looked up to me as well. I thought I could finally build a warm, loving family.
Carol, hand over your wallet.
Wow, you've got quite a bit in here. Saying that, Scott snatched my wallet as I came home from work, pulled out all the cash I had inside, and stuffed it into his own wallet. I silently picked up my discarded wallet, brushed off the dust, and put it back in my purse. I didn't even have the energy to protest or demand he return the money anymore. I seem to have a truly unfortunate fate when it comes to marriage. From the moment we registered our marriage, they changed completely. As soon as Scott realized that my salary was higher than his, he started pouring all of his earnings into gambling and alcohol. I knew he liked to drink since we met at a bar, but he had told me he didn't gamble. I had believed his words, but that was a lie. Scott's way of playing was so skilled that calling it a first-time gambling addiction would be an understatement. He was far too accustomed to it. And soon after Scott started living it up, the once kind Alan underwent a drastic change as well.
Don't just stand there spacing out. You're in the way, move.
Returning from cram school, Alan roughly shoved past me as I stood frozen in the hallway near the entrance.
Eek! Don't make such a girly scream, it's gross.
As I let out a shriek from hitting the wall, Alan clicked his tongue in irritation and spat those words at me. But this much was still tolerable. Whenever he was unhappy with his test results at cram school or regular school, he would hurl even worse verbal abuse at me. He was probably venting the stress from his entrance exam studies on me. I remember one time when I scolded Alan for his attitude, he gave me an incredibly cold look.
Are you misunderstanding something? We graciously decided to become family with a worn-out woman in her 50s like you. Don't act like you're my mom.
I was stunned by his words, clearly looking down on me. If I recall correctly, that was the day I had carefully considered what to buy and cook to help with his exam studies. Wiping up the eggs splattered on the floor, I cried at the thought that this was how he saw me. Scott, watching TV behind me, didn't offer to help or comfort me. These days, the word divorce keeps crossing my mind. But after the company threw us such a grand celebratory party, I can't exactly turn around and say we got divorced right away. Even if I quietly got divorced without saying anything, it would quickly spread through the internal company procedures. And while I'm not obligated to report it, I can't not pay my respects to the executives who orchestrated everything for us. I had many sleepless nights, plagued by headaches. And while I was agonizing over choosing the wrong marriage partner, unable to muster the resolve for divorce, Alan passed the entrance exam for the highly competitive medical school he had been aiming for on his first try. Thinking he would finally be free from the stress of entrance exams, I felt even more relieved than Alan himself. However, after receiving his acceptance letter, rather than going back to his old self, Alan got carried away with the success and escalated his verbal abuse towards me. Complaining was a given, and whenever I entered his line of sight, he would kick the floor or chairs and hit the walls as if to show how unpleasant it was for him. He even threw laundry at me once. Today too, as I came home utterly exhausted from work, Alan complained as if he was forcing himself to eat my cooking.
Is the food not ready yet? Hurry up and make it. I'm doing you a favor by eating it.
Even though I had already prepared the ingredients for the celebratory meal the day before, as soon as I got home, before I could even change out of my work clothes, I tiredly put on an apron and started making the side dishes. My nerves were completely frayed from the stress of repeatedly double-checking everything to make sure my poor health wouldn't affect my work performance, but none of that mattered to these two. Despite it being a celebration of Alan's acceptance, they had come home early and were relaxing in the living room as usual, not lifting a finger to help. And as if to add insult to injury, Scott laughed.
Hey, Carol, are you making Alan complain again? He's going to be a doctor in the future. Don't make him waste his precious time.
Instead of admonishing Alan, Scott berated me as if it was my fault for making Alan say such things. Ever since Alan's acceptance was confirmed, Scott had been putting me down even more than before, together with Alan, as if to appease him. One time, when I was crying alone in the living room in the middle of the night, Scott spat out these words to me.
Anyone can see who's the better choice to side with, between you who will retire in less than 10 years, and my son who will be earning a high salary as a doctor for decades to come.
I can never forget his face as he sneered at me, looking like a demon. At Scott's words, I shuddered, my face turning deathly pale. To them, I wasn't a life partner or anything of the sort. I was just a convenient person to bring in money and do the housework. There wasn't a shred of the warmth I once felt there. I gripped the kitchen knife tightly, biting my lip in frustration. For me, who had been working just as hard as any man at the trading company, being treated like a mere housekeeper was an even greater humiliation than when I discovered my first husband's infidelity. But divorce. As I was consumed by such circling thoughts, carrying the finished dishes to the table where Alan sat with his legs outstretched, he let out a sigh dripping with sarcasm.
This is the celebration for my acceptance? What the hell? Can't you put out something more luxurious? Unbelievable. I got into medical school, you know? Right, Dad?
Seriously, is this all you could prepare? Even with the roast chicken, sushi, colorful salads, and stewed dishes crowding the table, it seemed to fall far short of the luxurious meal they had in mind. I knew they would have a nasty attitude, but I also knew how much time and effort Alan had poured into his studies to overcome this difficult hurdle. That's why I had taken the time to make everything from scratch, hoping to please them even a little, but I was made painfully aware of my own foolishness. Their incessant complaining showed no signs of ending. If they were going to complain anyway, I might as well not cook at all, but if I bought something from the store, they would complain even more than when I made it myself, calling it half-assed or cheap. Ever since I was verbally abused for buying deli items when I came home late from overtime, I stopped serving store-bought food as is.
I'm sorry. Could you please eat it?
I said, pleading with them while holding back my frustration. If I didn't, they would never start eating. Even as they grumbled about how bad it was, I sighed in relief as the food disappeared into their mouths one after another. It seemed they were in a good mood today. I would save the extra ingredients I bought in case they demanded I remake the meal for tomorrow. That's when it happened. Stuffing his face to the point of vulgarity, Alan suddenly looked up as if remembering something.
Oh, right. Just to make it clear, don't you dare show up at my college entrance ceremony next month, you fake mom. What?
I reflexively lifted my head from where I had been looking down, my eyes meeting Alan's, who made no attempt to hide his displeasure.
Why are you so surprised? You even showed up uninvited to my high school graduation. People thought a woman with your saggy body was my mom, and it was humiliating for me. But
I was stunned by his spiteful words. Sure, I had been exhausted and maybe my dark circles were showing, but I had even gone to the beauty salon to get dolled up. I couldn't have looked bad enough to warrant such comments. Even if Alan wasn't my biological son, he was my only son now, and it was his graduation ceremony. I had rearranged meetings and business deals, somehow managing to take the day off to attend, and yet this was how he felt about me? As I sat there in shock, Scott added insult to injury.
Well, I guess there's only so much a makeup can do. Haha, she's an old woman after all. Seriously, for someone working at a trading company, having her around must really bring down the efficiency of the people around her.
The two of them gradually got more and more animated, talking about how ugly and old I had become. I may be pushing 60 soon, but this wasn't the kind of topic to laugh about while clapping your hands in front of a woman.
Hey, that's going too far, even for you. Shut up! Are you gonna lecture me again? I told you to stop acting like you're my mom.
When I angrily talked back, Alan cut me off with a shout.
Acting like your mom?
My words echoed in the now silent dining room. I couldn't find anything else to say. He had been such a good kid at first. He was under a lot of stress from his entrance exams now. I had become his mom, so I had to be patient. I kept telling myself that, over and over. Even if I was verbally abused by someone else's child who was already an adult, I had thought that if he accepted me as his dad's wife, I would do my best to be his mom.
Listen up. I don't think of you as my mom, not even a tiny bit. It pisses me off just having a fake like you hanging around our house.
Not even trying to hide his anger, Alan stabbed his fork into the chicken. I had been wrong in my thinking from the very start. He had never accepted me at all. Seeing the tears spilling from my eyes, Alan clicked his tongue in annoyance.
Seriously, why did you even marry a woman like this, Dad?
Put on the spot by Alan's pointed gaze, Scott's shoulders jumped in surprise before he hurriedly tried to appease his son.
Sorry about that, Alan. Come on, Carol, you apologize too.
With those words, Scott tried to push my head down in a forced bow. This was ridiculous. Why should I have to apologize?
Fine, I get it.
I brushed off Scott's hand and stood up forcefully, making a loud noise.
What's gotten into you all of a sudden?
Surprised by my action, Scott recoiled and stared at me in confusion. Alan also looked up at me with his mouth agape in shock.
I can't take it anymore. I'm sick and tired of this.
I took off the apron I was still wearing, crumpled it up, and threw it at Scott before heading to the bedroom. As I pulled out the large suitcase I had bought for long business trips, Scott and Alan hurriedly chased after me.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
I had no desire to answer their bewildered voices anymore. I wasn't living just to be at their beck and call.
I'll send you the divorce papers later.
After packing the bare essentials into my suitcase, I headed straight for the front door.
Divorce? If she says she's leaving, just let her go, Dad.
In contrast to the shocked Scott, Alan's mocking words were cut off by the door slamming behind me. I had been wrong. I should have made this decision much sooner. I must have been out of my mind to waste my time on these bastards. The day I left the house, I stayed at a hotel near my office. The next day, I immediately went around to the people and places that had helped us when we got married, explaining the reasons for the divorce and apologizing. Although they were surprised at first, they must have sensed something from my usual demeanor. At the very least, none of my colleagues at work tried to dissuade me from the divorce. About a month after submitting the divorce papers, my cell phone was buzzing with a barrage of calls from Scott. As I was working, feeling a sense of comfort in the tranquility I had finally regained and the busyness of the new fiscal year, I furrowed my brow and excused myself from my coworkers before getting up from my seat. Stepping out into the emergency stairwell of the office building, I sighed and answered the phone.
What is it?
Before I could even get the words out, Scott's furious voice blared in my ear.
Hey, what the hell is going on?
Calm down, what are you talking about? I was fed up with his shouting voice that didn't even bother to identify himself. Even if I could tell who was calling from the phone number, would it kill him to at least say his name? With that thought, I sighed and prompted him to continue. Then, an entirely unexpected response came.
Alan's acceptance to the university has been revoked.
Huh?
Did he get involved in some kind of incident?
After blurting that out, I suddenly had second thoughts. Why should I care about someone else's acceptance being revoked?
Well, whatever the reason, it has nothing to do with me anymore, so don't call me about it.
As I said that and moved the phone away from my ear to hang up, Scott started yelling so loudly that the screen vibrated.
Cut the crap! It's your fault for not paying the tuition. What? Why would I be the one to pay his tuition?
I gripped the phone tighter and retorted upon hearing his words. But Scott didn't stay silent either.
You're the one with the higher income, so of course you should be the one paying. I even gave you all the paperwork for the procedures.
What was he suddenly going on about? As I furrowed my brow, I suddenly remembered. He had indeed dumped all the bothersome paperwork on me, but on the day I left the house, I had gathered it all and left it behind.
I put all the paperwork together in an easy-to-find place, didn't I? Yeah, and I submitted it as is. After doing all that, why didn't you pay the tuition?
Scott shouted in frustration at my words, and the headache I had forgotten about came rushing back. Sighing, I looked up at the sky, wondering if happiness was really slipping away from me.
Don't try to pin this nonsense on me. Besides, didn't the university try to contact you to confirm?
When I said that out of exasperation, Scott stammered and started making excuses.
Well, it was from an unknown number, so I thought it might be a suspicious call. I can't believe this. You blocked the number without even checking who it was?
I stared at Scott in disbelief over his unbelievable statement. Come to think of it, I vaguely remembered Scott saying something like this before.
As a manager, I get so many annoying calls from who knows where. I'd block them right away, but it's a never-ending battle.
He had bragged about it proudly, but I bet he never dreamed it would come back to bite him like this. Besides, he had left checking the mail to me for the longest time, so knowing him, he probably didn't even bother to look at the reminder letters. I'm sure he didn't even notice the notification about the acceptance being revoked. But all of this was a tragedy of his own making. It was none of my concern.
This is your fault. Go apologize to the university right now and pay the tuition.
That's why I was troubled by him trying to shift the blame like this.
Don't be ridiculous. We're already divorced. Why should I have to pay for a stranger's tuition?
Ignoring Scott's loud ranting, I hung up the phone and hit the block button. God, how foolish can I be? I should have blocked his number right from the start. With a heavy sigh, I went back to work. During my lunch break that day, as I stepped out to get something to eat, Scott and Alan stood in my way.
It's because you were too stingy to pay the tuition that I.
Their matching new suits were wrinkled, and they were both panting, as if they had run here. They glared at me with hatred in their eyes. Their arguments hadn't changed one bit. In other words, they insisted that it was my fault Alan's acceptance had been revoked. So they repeated the unreasonable demand Scott had made over the phone earlier, telling me to take responsibility and somehow get Alan enrolled. They can go ahead and be angry, but they're directing their anger at the wrong person.
Look, how many times do I have to tell you? Scott and I are already divorced. I never adopted Alan, so he's a complete stranger to me.
I probably didn't even have the energy left to sigh anymore.
In the first place, why should I, a stranger, have to pay for his tuition when his actual father wouldn't?
Scott's face flushed red with anger at my logical argument, as if I were lecturing a child.
Shut up! You were the higher earner, so of course you should pay. Spouting all this bullshit, my ex-wife and now you? Women are so.
No matter how much I explained, not only did he refuse to back down unless he got the answer he wanted, but he even made misogynistic remarks. That's when I took out a certain item.
Hey, could you listen to this for a second?
In my hand was a small recorder. The truth is, over the past few months, I had been recording every single relentless verbal abuse and attempt to force me into submission through violence from Scott and Alan. When I played it back, their faces turned visibly pale.
If you don't stop this now, I'll submit this to the police.
At the word police, Scott visibly cowered, looking like he might collapse at any moment. But Alan took a deep breath and then put on that nasty, mocking sneer.
Ha, I'm an elite, you know. I'm just giving some guidance to an incompetent old hag.
Alan, acting all high and mighty as if he were in the right, put his hands on his hips and puffed out his chest.
The police, huh? I'd like to see you try. Who's gonna listen to a woman like you? Hey, Alan! Cut it out!
Scott hurriedly tried to stop Alan, who had started provoking me, probably realizing that the odds were against them. But that seemed to have the opposite effect. Alan, who had been put on a pedestal all this time, kept repeating his disparaging comments about me and his misogynistic remarks as if he himself were the law. Shoving aside the panicking Scott, he spat in my direction. And before long, his loud voice had caught the attention of the rubberneckers around us. Along with the murmuring, I could see cameras being pointed our way. But Alan probably didn't notice this due to his anger. He kept hurling abuse at me as I took it all in with a blank expression.
Are you all right, Carol? I'll call the police right now.
One of my colleagues who had also been about to go out for lunch seemed to have noticed that I was at the center of the commotion and hurried over to me.
The police? Alan, we're leaving.
When he saw her take out her cell phone to dial 911, Scott let out a scream. Then he dragged Alan, who was still popping veins in his forehead, feeling like he hadn't said enough, and they fled the scene.
Are you okay, Carol?
The colleague who had rushed over asked me again, looking at me with concern.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for your help. You were just about to go to lunch, right? Shall we go together?
Perhaps I had been more tense than I realized, as I felt the strength leave my shoulders in relief. I invited her to lunch, my treat, as a thank you for helping me, and we went to eat our now delayed meal. When I returned to my desk, thinking that the unexpected incident had taken up quite some time, one of the executives called out to me and led me to the conference room. It seemed I wouldn't be able to catch a break just yet.
About the commotion earlier, we had the unfortunate timing of having someone from Scott's company here to see us. They want to hear what happened.
As he explained this to me on the way, I felt a chill run down my spine. Unfortunate timing was an understatement. In the end, I had caused trouble for both my own company and theirs.
I deeply apologize for the disturbance.
As soon as I entered the room, I bowed deeply. Even if it was a private matter between a divorced couple, I had gotten into a fight with a client company's sales manager right in front of the office. It seemed only natural that they would want to know the details. I explained the full sequence of events leading up to the earlier commotion, as well as the reasons for our divorce. If I tried to gloss over things or lie here, it might end up disadvantaging both my company and theirs. After all, we were dealing with Scott. There was no telling what he might pull.
I can't believe this. You've been through a lot. Our employee has caused you a great deal of trouble. And we apologize for making you discuss your private matters.
The client company representative turned pale and apologized profusely after hearing the story. Even those who had been deceived by Scott's facade, thinking there was no way that sales manager could be like that, immediately changed their tune when I played the recordings. The cause of the earlier commotion is all here in these recordings. If Scott tries to tell any lies, then...
Of course, with this evidence, we fully trust your side of the story, Carol.
When I voiced my concerns, everyone present nodded in agreement. I wasn't sure how things would go on Scott's end, but it seemed I would be able to avoid any disciplinary action for causing the commotion. With that thought, I let out a sigh of relief. 6 months later, accompanied by my lawyer, I decided to have a discussion with Scott and Alan about the future. Of course, it was a discussion about how I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them from now on. But for some unfathomable reason, the words that came out of Scott's mouth were utterly ridiculous.
Carol, we were wrong. I'm sorry. Let's keep doing our best as a family from now on. What?
I couldn't help but let out a discordant voice. As I stood there baffled, Alan added insult to injury.
I was in the wrong, so please, be a real mom to me this time.
I felt goosebumps all over my body. The first thing that popped into my head was just one word: disgusting. Both Scott and Alan had put on that seemingly kind and sincere demeanor they had when they first approached me, trying to ensnare me once again. Now that I knew their true faces, the smiles plastered on their faces only filled me with revulsion. How many women had Scott and Alan deceived like this, I wondered. Even the lawyer accompanying me was visibly on guard.
Don't say such ridiculous things.
That was all I could manage to say in response. As if to protect myself, I gripped my left arm tightly with my right hand. Seeing my sour expression, Scott persisted even further.
Come on, don't say that. Today's discussion is for that purpose, right? Let's properly live as a family again, okay?
His tone was almost coaxing, and I felt a chill run through me. I shook it off and firmly refused.
Absolutely not. I don't want you coming to my office like before. Don't ever come near me again.
At that, Scott, who had been playing nice until then, finally seemed to reach his limit. He slammed his hand on the table with a bang, trying to intimidate me.
You get all high and mighty just because we apologized? Listen up. The only reason we came here today was because we were willing to start over. We're saying we'll remarry you. Who do you think you are?
His nostrils flared as he took deep, excited breaths. Both my lawyer and I stared at him in disbelief. They hadn't changed at all from before. They were just hiding their demonic true selves beneath a kind facade. My lawyer, who had been cowed, came back to his senses and composed himself, broaching the subject anew.
The reason we asked you to come here today is to explain the compensation claim for the divorce trial and to have you promise to refrain from contacting Carol for the rest of your lives.
Saying this as calmly as possible, he placed a single invoice in front of Scott. The moment they laid eyes on the paper titled compensation claim, Scott and Alan bared their teeth, openly displaying their anger.
Huh? Compensation? What compensation are you talking about? You're the one who up and left on your own. The saggy hag is just making false accusations to get money.
The two of them were making a huge fuss, but my lawyer seemed to be getting used to it and handled them without flinching.
Please don't raise your voice. Even that completely immoral behavior of yours is more than enough grounds for a compensation claim. But Scott, you were cheating on her, weren't you? What? Don't be ridiculous. I never cheated.
Faced with the lawyer's stern gaze, Scott's earlier bravado vanished in an instant, and he visibly panicked. It seemed Alan hadn't known about Scott's infidelity and stood there frozen in shock. I took a deep breath and began to speak as calmly as I could.
Your behavior was so abnormal that I reached out to your first wife. What are you doing, going behind my back?
As Scott looked like he was about to lash out, the lawyer silenced him with a look. Once he confirmed that Scott had restrained himself and fallen silent, the lawyer prompted me to continue.
It turns out you were the one who cheated.
I presented a copy of the divorce agreement that Scott's ex-wife had given me, urging me to use it. It proved that Scott's infidelity was the cause of their divorce and that the matter had been settled with Scott at fault. When I met Scott, he had told me that he was the one who had been cheated on, but that was a blatant lie. Scott himself was the one who had cheated.
Your ex-wife told me I should have a detective investigate you right away. Of course, I did so without hesitation. And just as I thought, evidence of your affairs kept popping up one after another.
Saying that, I spread out the detective's investigation report on the table.
I'll offset the property division with the amount you took from me, so you'd better pay the compensation in full.
I glared at him as I said that, and Scott began to tremble, now resorting to begging for forgiveness.
I'm sorry, Carol. I let my guard down and got taken advantage of. I was seduced and had no choice. Please, forgive me. Come on now, hurry up and sign.
I'm busy. I looked down at Scott, who had begun to apologize profusely in an unseemly manner, without any emotion. Then Alan, comparing my coldly dismissive attitude with Scott's pathetic state, started trying to butter me up.
Carol, I'm different. I'm not like my crazy dad. I'm on your side. You're the only real family I have, Carol.
Alan!
Even Scott, who had been begging for forgiveness, gaped at Alan in shock over his sudden change. Alan put on his best good boy act and tried to take my hand.
I'm still a child who needs parental protection, so I need your support, Carol.
I brushed off the hand he extended without hesitation. What's with this "I'm still a child" crap? It's so disgusting I might break out in hives. I put some distance between us again and conveyed my revulsion without hiding it.
You're already 18, right? You're a proper adult now, and your actions have consequences. You're smart enough to get into medical school on your first try, so shouldn't you be the one supporting your dad instead?
Cut the crap!
Enraged by my words as I tried to protect myself, Scott, who had been groveling on the floor, and Alan, who had been trying to butter me up, finally resorted to violence and swung their fists at me. But their blows never reached me. My lawyer deliberately called the police in a loud voice so that the two agitated men would notice. Realizing the police were on their way, they frantically fled the law office. When the officers arrived just a few minutes later, my lawyer and I explained the situation. They concluded that I should absolutely avoid meeting with Scott and Alan directly from now on. From then on, all communication would be done through my lawyer. Knowing those two, I had thought the compensation claim would likely drag on. But it was settled sooner than I expected. As it turned out, Alan had apparently become a shut-in. You see, when Scott and Alan had caused that commotion in front of my office earlier, some rubbernecker had posted a video online of Alan verbally abusing me. It had blown up due to how terrible it was. Alan, who had been bragging about getting into medical school on his social media with his face visible, was quickly identified and apparently received some pretty awful direct messages. His pride shattered, Alan's spirit seemed to have broken. I heard through the grapevine that he had stopped coming out of his room. As for Scott, his reputation within the company had already hit rock bottom due to the divorce scandal. His demands for us to get back together and the police incident were the final nail in the coffin, and he was being treated like a pariah. His own motivation seemed to be at an all-time low, but with Alan shutting himself in, the debts from the money he had poured into gambling, and the compensation he had to pay me, he apparently couldn't even quit his job. Scott had been demoted from sales manager because of the disturbance he caused in front of our company, his client. Lacking the courage to change jobs in his late 40s, he seemed to be working on inertia. The new person in charge of our account was complaining about him with a give-me-a-break attitude.
This isn't something I should be telling you, Carol, but Scott's misogynistic remarks have become a social issue. But seriously, we're getting complaints from complete strangers. It seemed the new person in charge at the client company had quite a loose tongue. When he found out I was Scott's ex-wife,
he started venting and telling me about Scott's current situation without me even asking. I considered requesting a change in who handled our account, not wanting to get involved with them anymore. But I figured it might be good to stay informed of the situation to avoid any weird ideas, so I left things as they were. Having finally overcome what might have been the greatest hardship of my life, I was now throwing myself into my work more than ever. I had built a good friendship with Scott's ex-wife since she cooperated with me, and it was nice that we could easily keep in touch as fellow single women. We were planning to go out for some delicious drinks together soon.
If you don't want kids, maybe I'll have them. Maybe I should just divorce and we have them.
Suddenly, the word divorce popped up at an oddly serene dinner table. My heart skipped a beat and I inadvertently stopped what I was doing. But I quickly lifted my head and faced the two of them again.
All right, we're getting a divorce, then.
Huh?
Despite being the ones to bring it up, both looked surprised at my response. Seeing their reaction, I immediately backtracked on the divorce talk.
Right, of course. You're obviously joking.
Osamand laughed, relieved. Next to him, Carly covered her mouth with her hand, chuckling along. But the truth is, I do want a divorce. However, I haven't gathered enough evidence yet. I'm far from ready to make a move. I want to set things straight with Osamand and others, but only when everything is in order. This conversation only made me more determined than before.
Yeah, just kidding.
I joined in on Osamand's laughter, making sure not to let on that I'm serious about wanting a divorce. My name is Lena. I'm 27. I used to work in an office at a design company, but after getting married, I quit my job to become a housewife. My husband's name is Osamand. We met at a party I was invited to by a friend. I've never been good at socializing. On days off, I'd stay in, and even on work days, I'd skip out on drinking parties and outings, preferring to spend time alone. Because of that lifestyle, it's no surprise I hadn't had a boyfriend in a while. All my friends and juniors were either married or in relationships. It made me anxious whenever the topic of boyfriends or husbands came up. I felt the pressure to find someone soon when this opportunity came from a friend. My friend was surprised I took up the invitation.
Wow, I invited you without expecting much. I know I'm the one that invited you, but did something happen? Nothing really. Just had a change of heart. I'm getting to that age where I should find a boyfriend and start thinking about the future.
I shared my thoughts without holding anything back. Then,
I see. You've had a change of heart. I'm glad I invited you,
my friend said, laughing. On the day of the party, I went to the bar, which was the venue, with my friend, and a few people were already there, chatting and having a good time. She easily joined the group, but I couldn't. Even as the party started, I couldn't manage to join in on the conversations and ended up drinking alone at the edge of the room. I wondered if it was impossible for someone like me to find a boyfriend. I stared at my nearly empty glass, lost in thought. The lively chatter from around me filled the air. My friend seemed to be enjoying the party, being at the center of the conversation. I envied those who could genuinely enjoy such gatherings. I wished I could be like that. As I looked at my watch thinking about leaving early, someone approached me.
Hey, what's up?
You look pretty lonely over here.
Huh.
A man started talking to me. That man would later become my husband, Osamand. Would you like to talk with me?
Yes, I would.
Osamand took a seat next to me, placing the drink he had been sipping on the table. We had introduced ourselves earlier, so we knew each other's names.
So, you're Lena, right?
Yes, and you're Osamand.
That's right.
Thanks for remembering my name.
Osaman thanked me, looking genuinely pleased. After that, we didn't join the rest of the group, opting instead to continue our conversation just between the two of us. We started with work, then moved on to hobbies, and even where we lived, the topics varied.
Wow, really?
Osaman seemed to pick up on my nervousness and made an effort to keep the conversation lively. Before I knew it, I was swept up in his enthusiasm, and my nervousness had vanished. Osaman was having fun talking, and he seemed genuinely interested in listening to me. Eventually, I found myself becoming fond of Osaman. I myself thought I was too easy. But for someone who doesn't usually talk to people, this was enough to make me take notice. After the party ended, we went to a bar to continue drinking, just the two of us. Alone with me, Osaman's demeanor changed completely from before, becoming more composed. Perhaps he had been playing up to the atmosphere before. Yet, his willingness to listen to me remained unchanged. Seeing this side of Osaman made my feelings for him grow.
Today was fun. Thank you.
Thank you as well. We hit it off so well that we exchanged our numbers and agreed to meet again. After that, we started seeing each other frequently. Could things really go this smoothly? The moment I decided to find a boyfriend, I was invited to a party and met someone compatible. I had expected more of a struggle, so I was a bit taken aback by how easily things were progressing. About 2 months after the party, Osaman confessed his feelings, and we started dating. He was just as kind to me as he had been before we were officially together. Whenever we both had time off, we would go on drives or trips, spending time together. That said, Osaman was busy with work, so our schedules didn't always match up, and we probably saw each other less often than other couples might. But we made up for it with phone calls and emails. I was satisfied with that. To say I wasn't lonely would be a lie. I wanted to see Osaman more, to be with Osaman more. Those feelings only grew stronger day by day. However, on the days we could meet, I was filled with happiness. Each time, I was reminded of how much I liked Osaman. Then one day, during our usual routine, Osaman suddenly introduced me to a woman. I want you to meet someone. Carly. She's an old friend of mine.
Pleased to meet you.
The woman introduced as Carly was Osaman's childhood friend. From what I heard, Osaman and Carly had been close since kindergarten, and they still visited each other's parents' homes and went out to eat together. Carly has always been such a great person. Oh, remember that time?
Wait, why are you bringing that up now? I mean, it did happen, but...
Osaman and Carly were completely engrossed in their own world, chatting away. Naturally, I had no idea how to navigate this situation. All I could do was watch them with a forced smile, feeling out of place. Noticing my discomfort, Osaman said,
I'm sorry. I figured you'd be seeing Carly around, so I thought I'd introduce you.
Honestly, I wondered why I needed to get along with his childhood friend in the future. But I wasn't strong enough to voice such thoughts there and then. I just went along with it, trying not to upset Osaman and his friend.
Oh, is that so?
But you didn't know I was meeting with you today, right? Sorry if it feels like I just showed up out of the blue.
Not at all. Please don't worry about it. I'm really glad to meet you. Really? Thank you.
Carly smiled sweetly, thanking me. However, as time went on, Osaman and Carly continued to create their own little world, leaving me feeling left out. At first, I desperately tried to join in their conversation, but eventually, I realized it was futile and just sat there, sipping my coffee alone. If they were going to talk amongst themselves, I wondered why I was even needed there. I felt a mix of sadness and emptiness, silently observing them. The situation didn't change until 2 hours later when I finally managed to excuse myself from their company, after being treated like I wasn't there. I'm really sorry. It's been a while since I've seen Carly.
I see. No, it's totally fine. It's good that you got to catch up after so long.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. Osamand apologized, seeming genuinely remorseful. It appeared he was aware that he had done something wrong. I couldn't help feeling slightly angry that he had created this exclusive world with Carly in the first place. No, really, it's okay. I accepted Osamand's apology without holding any grudge. After that incident, Osamand never brought up Carly again. Perhaps he realized it was a sensitive issue. He started to check on my feelings more, likely thinking he had indeed made a mistake. At the time, I felt lonely and insecure, but deep down, I knew it wasn't something to make a big deal about. After all, they were childhood friends. It made sense that they'd get caught up in conversation after a long time apart. However, I couldn't bring myself to say I was okay with Carly. I didn't want to dredge up the topic myself. A few weeks after meeting Carly, Osamand's behavior returned to normal, and it felt like our daily life had resumed. A year later, Osamand proposed, and we got married. The wedding was attended by family, friends, colleagues, and Carly. Carly seemed genuinely happy for us.
Congratulations on your wedding. I'm sure you know, but Osamand is really a great guy, and I believe you'll be very happy together.
Thank you.
Carly made a point to come over to me and speak. Her smile was a complex mix of happiness and loneliness. After the wedding, we returned to the new apartment we had rented as a married couple. Though we were already officially married and lived together, I remembered when we moved in and felt somewhat embarrassed. Osamand was right there beside me. Just the thought of being able to share the same space with him from now on filled my heart with joy. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of our future together. I wanted to spend forever with Osamand. However, this happy life did not last long. Even after marriage, Osamand was still busy with work, but he made sure to spend as much time with me as possible. Except for when he had work dinners or special occasions, he would always come home before the date changed, and despite being tired himself, he would offer kind words to me as I did the housework. He was with me all weekend, taking me on trips and shopping. It might have seemed ordinary, but I felt truly happy with just that. But then, suddenly, a certain person started to intrude on our lives, significantly changing our routine. It was during a weekend shopping trip in town with Osamand. I spotted a familiar figure. It was Carly. She had seen us two and hurried over with a happy expression.
Hey, Osamand, Lena. Carly. What a coincidence.
As I was about to greet her, Osamand casually reached out and tousled Carly's hair.
Hey, Osamand. You're messing up my hair.
Sorry. I just can't help it when I see you. I understood that they were close, but seeing them like this pained my heart. Osamand didn't seem to think it was a big deal, and Carly didn't seem to mind. They started talking without paying any attention to me, reigniting a sense of emptiness within me. I didn't know what to do, so I just looked at nearby products and thought vaguely about where to go next. Despite being able to see me, Carly continued to talk to Osamand without any concern. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before ending. Sorry. I didn't realize you two were on a date today. My bad. It's fine. Right, Lena? Yeah, it's fine. Unable to deny it, I pretended not to mind. Since that day, Carly began to appear more frequently wherever Osamand and I went out together. I thought it was a coincidence the first 2 times, but after it kept happening, I couldn't help but think they were arranging it behind my back. Whenever they met, they acted as if it were a chance encounter.
Wow.
What a coincidence. That became their routine phrase. Once, I gathered the courage to ask, are you two in touch?
Seeing each other so often when we're out, it seems unlikely to be just coincidence.
However, they wouldn't admit it.
No, it's just a coincidence. Right, Carly?
Yeah. Just a coincidence. Happened to be, right?
They laughed it off together. But their expressions seemed almost mocking. They would hold hands or touch each other's cheeks every time they met. Their level of physical affection seemed excessive. Despite being told they had always been this way, claiming it was normal for childhood friends, something about it didn't sit right with me.
Wait, should we stop holding hands? Lena looks mad.
Sorry, Lena. But Carly is really just an old friend. There's absolutely nothing weird between us, so don't worry, okay?
Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Well, it's not like I like you or anything.
After Carly's comment, Osamand cheerfully placed his hand on her head again. Despite my anger, Osamand continued his physical affection with Carly. Carly didn't seem to mind at all. Is it normal for childhood friends to be this close? Watching Osamand and Carly, my distrust grew day by day. After several similar incidents, I mustered up the courage to speak to Osamand.
Osamand. What's up?
Osamand looked at me with his usual kind smile.
About Carly. I know she's your childhood friend, and I understand you're close, but could you maybe reduce the physical affection a bit?
Reduce it.
Yeah, since we're married.
Osamand's face turned serious for a moment before he relaxed again. That brief serious expression scared me, making me regret bringing it up.
Sorry. Was it bothering you?
A little. Normally, Osamand would laugh it off and agree. But he was different that day. But you know, Carly and I are just childhood friends, right? There's really nothing to worry about.
What does that mean?
Just don't think too much about it. Consider it part of our communication. Okay. With a troubled smile, he walked away from me. Seeing this, I couldn't help but feel anxious, regretting my question and wondering if I had made an unreasonable request or upset Osamand. At the same time, I questioned if I was wrong. As his wife, I wanted him to limit his physical contact with Carly, even though they were childhood friends. Nonetheless, life with Osamand continued uneasily. A month after my request, nothing had changed. In fact, it seemed to get worse. Carly started to intrude on our home. She would come over on weekdays and weekends, eat, and then leave, with me preparing everything. Carly would just show up suddenly, spending time talking to Osamand on the sofa. Even when I asked for help with carrying things.
You can handle that much on your own, right?
Yeah.
She would dismiss my request. By this time, Osamand had completely taken Carly's side. He hardly listened to me and always spoke in Carly's favor when I objected. Seriously. Lena can't do anything by herself.
Hey, don't say that in front of her, that's the worst.
They laughed at me as if I were a joke. Naturally, I didn't feel good about it. Whenever I returned to the kitchen without saying anything, I would end up being criticized.
Is she sulking?
Over just this?
Come on, that's a bit much, isn't it?
I continued preparing the meal, trying to ignore their voices. It seemed only fair that she help with preparations since she came over uninvited. Yet, why should I be the one to face complaints? Moreover, being accused of sulking or being incapable of doing anything alone was incredibly rude. Carly came over several times a week. And she always made sure to have a meal before leaving. Even during meals, there was no sense of calm. Carly would sit next to Osamand, constantly pestering him. Osamand seemed to not mind her actions. They would feed each other or share laughs, looking entirely like a couple to anyone observing. But it turns out Carly actually had a fiancé named Raymond. He worked at the same company as Carly, holding a rather prestigious position. Though I heard he was abroad currently. Still, I thought it inappropriate for someone engaged to engage in such excessive physical intimacy with their childhood friend.
Carly, could you maybe stop coming over so often? The food costs are adding up, and it's more work to cook.
However, Osamand just laughed off my request.
Come on. Carly's single right now, and she says it's lonely going home to an empty house. Maybe we should be a bit more understanding. But
It's fine, really.
Osamand didn't seem inclined to criticize Carly at all. In fact, he seemed happier with her than with me. I wondered why Osamand couldn't show me the same smile. Eventually, I began to despise not only Carly but also the sight of Osamand smiling at her. A year into our marriage, Carly's intrusions continued unabated. By this time, I had given up, no longer complaining and simply catering to Carly. Maybe this was the arrangement Osamand and Carly desired. Their physical intimacy intensified, and they appeared even happier than before. I dreaded that this lifestyle would persist until Carly got married. The thought filled me with gloom. Divorce. The word started to cross my mind occasionally. Yet, I found it hard to take any action. Time kept moving forward. But one day, a comment from Carly prompted me to decide on divorce. "Hey, aren't you two planning to have kids?"
What?
Her tactless remark made me exclaim in surprise. Osamand and I had decided not to have children yet. And we might never do so. That's what I thought I had said, but...
Lena's just really against it.
What? I never said that.
I hadn't said anything of the sort. Osamand was trying to look good in front of Carly. I glared and contradicted him.
Really, Lena? It's been about a year since you got married, right? Why would you be against it? No, I never said I was against.
But Carly wasn't listening at all.
Didn't Osamand like kids? Lena, isn't it selfish to say no? I'm not being selfish. I never said that. It's a real concern.
Osamand continued to take Carly's side. Even in this situation, choosing his childhood friend over his wife. It made me realize for the first time that perhaps I couldn't continue going on with him. Then Carly said something outrageous, pushing me further.
If you don't want kids, maybe I'll have them. Maybe I should just divorce and we have them.
Osamand joined in with her laughter, not rebuking Carly's words. The casual mention of divorce shocked me, my heart raced, and I stopped what I was doing. Divorce. There are jokes that can be made and ones that shouldn't be. The inability to distinguish between the two was exasperating. However, I quickly faced them again.
All right, we're getting a divorce, then.
Huh?
They were surprised, even though they brought it up. I quickly corrected the notion of divorce.
Just kidding. Maybe it's time we started thinking about kids. Right, of course. You're obviously joking.
Osamand laughed, relieved, while Carly covered her mouth beside him, smiling joyously. Such a happy occasion. But the truth was, I did want a divorce. Despite joking about it, I couldn't shake the thought. I'll really get a divorce. Annoyingly, Carly's remark made me decide to divorce Osamand. Yet, it was too early to act.
Yeah, just kidding.
While formulating a plan in my head, I responded to Osamand. From observing Osamand and Carly up close, I suspected they might be having an affair. If that was the case, my options were limited. After much thought, I decided to hire a detective to gather evidence of the affair. I also tried to sneak a peek at Osamand's mobile phone to gather evidence myself. If they weren't cheating, I'd think of something else. But there was no need. When I checked Osamand's unlocked phone, there was an abundance of exchanges with Carly. The content was damning. From sweet conversations akin to those of lovers to suggestive messages and photos from hotel visits. There was more than enough to call it evidence. Considering Osamand didn't lock his phone, he seemed utterly careless. Further investigation by the detective confirmed they met frequently. Mostly at hotels. The dates they met matched the days Osamand told me he'd be home late. He had lied about overtime and drinking parties to meet Carly. Even though I had a vague idea they were cheating, seeing concrete evidence made me feel indescribable. Meanwhile, Osamand and Carly's behavior didn't change. Carly kept coming over, eating, teasing me, and having fun. Unaware of what I was doing behind the scenes, their carefree actions seemed almost ludicrous. About a month after I started gathering evidence, Osamand invited me to an event.
There's an engagement party for Carly next month. Engagement party?
Yeah, you know Carly's fiancé is pretty high up, right? So, they need to have a sort of introduction party for the marriage.
So, her partner is coming back?
Yeah, I think he might already be back.
The engagement party was irrelevant to me. The nerve of having such a party while engaging in an affair baffled me. I see. You've been invited? You should go, I said dismissively, somewhat irritated by Osamand's nonchalant laughter. But his response was unexpected. What are you talking about? You're coming with me.
Me? With you? Why?
Because you've always been so helpful to Carly.
Oh, I see. She wants me there because I was helpful. Did they really invite me for that reason? My heart, already jaded, doubted even the reason for my invitation. But it would be rude to decline if I was invited. I thought you might not like parties. Can you manage?
No, I'll go. She invited me, after all.
Osamand's face brightened at my words.
Great. I'll let Carly know.
He seemed pleased as he went to his room with his phone, likely to contact Carly. In truth, I didn't want to go. The last thing I wanted was to see Carly happy. Why should I put myself in such a situation? However, as I prepared, an idea struck me. This plan could significantly change my current predicament. If so, using the party to my advantage was too good an opportunity to miss. What I'm about to do is low as a person. But I had been tormented by Osamand and Carly far more. A little revenge seemed justified. I prepared for the party and my plan of retaliation simultaneously. A month later, the day of the party arrived. Dressed appropriately, Osamand and I headed to the venue. Entering the venue, the opulence of chandeliers, carpets, and tables made me hesitate. The old Osamand would have reassured me here, but now he was busy scanning the room for someone. The guests all seemed important, making me feel out of place. Then, someone called out.
Osamand. You made it.
Turning toward the voice, I saw Carly, accompanied by a fresh-faced young man and a kindly-looking elderly couple. Apparently, the young man was Carly's fiancé, Raymond, and the elderly couple were her parents.
Congratulations, Carly. Thank you. And to you too, and Raymond too. Congratulations.
Thank you for your kind words. Osamand was unusually polite, a side of him I might have never seen before. Afterward, the party officially began with an announcement. After getting my meal, I returned to my seat to find Osamand and Carly's parents engaged in a lively conversation. Osamand, you and Carly are childhood friends, right? What was she like back then?
Carly back then? Hey, that's kind of embarrassing.
Osamand, unfazed by Carly's embarrassment, shared stories of her past.
She liked catching bugs and racing. We used to play tag a lot. You're really going to tell that story?
Carly squirmed, visibly embarrassed, but not entirely displeased. You two really are close.
Watching you, it's like you're real siblings.
I knew it was impolite, but I couldn't let myself be swept along if I wanted to execute my plan. I apologized internally as I interjected. Osamand seemed surprised by my interruption, eyes wide.
Really? What's it like when Carly is with Osamand?
They're very close. How should I put it? They're like lovers.
Hey, Lena!
Osamand tried to stop me, but I continued. Carly often comes over for meals. She talks with Osamand the whole time I'm preparing food, looking very happy. During meals, they feed each other, hold hands. They're really close.
Hey, what are you?
I could feel the atmosphere freeze with my words. Carly's parents and Raymond looked at Osamand and Carly as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing.
Feed each other? Yes. Oh, I don't have photos of them feeding each other, but I do have pictures of them looking very close and their exchanges. Would you like to see? Hey! Lena!
Before Osamand could stop me, I opened my mobile phone to show the evidence gathered by the detective and myself. Raymond's face paled significantly upon seeing it.
Lena! Don't say weird things.
Weird?
I'm just sharing the truth.
This is how you two usually are. Osamand bit his lip, unable to say anything, his expression sour. But Carly lashed out at me. I felt vindicated. I had never seen Osamand and Carly look so frustrated. Deciding to go through with my revenge felt right.
Lena! Stop being freaky! And why do you have these photos? You shouldn't know about this. What? Did you hire a detective? Unbelievable!
Yes, I hired a detective. Why? Osamand was taken aback, realizing his actions with Carly, which went beyond mere childhood friendship, had been exposed.
Want to know why?
I pulled out a completed divorce application from my bag and slammed it in front of Osamand. Let's get divorced. I can't take it anymore.
There's no need to say that here. Ever since we got married, Carly has been a constant presence in my life. We ran into her whenever we went out, and despite asking you to keep distance, she came over for dinner multiple times. And to top it off, you lied about working late to meet her at hotels. What's the point of being married then?
I let it all out. Osamand's loud response had drawn the attention of everyone in the venue.
I know it was wrong, but... If you knew it was wrong, why didn't you stop? Didn't I ask you to stop repeatedly?
Well, yes, but...
You don't really think it was wrong, do you? If you did, you wouldn't make excuses, you'd apologize.
Yeah, sorry. As Osamand and I argued, Carly attempted to intervene.
Hey, stop arguing here.
Raymond, Mom, Dad, help!
However, the three of them did not take Carly's side.
Carly, those photos are real, aren't they?
What?
I'm asking if they're real. Not that you'd admit to cheating on your own.
Raymond looked profoundly disheartened. Understandably so. He must have been thinking of his fiancée Carly while working abroad, only to find her cheating with her childhood friend.
With so much evidence, I can't marry you. I was a fool to trust you.
Wait. That's not true. They're all lies.
Lies? So, you're saying Lena fabricated all this just to trap you and Osamand?
Yes, that's right.
What? I couldn't hold back anymore. Was she not satisfied after manipulating me all this much? Still trying to control the narrative? Even now, Carly wouldn't admit to the affair, which infuriated me further, and I couldn't help but shout.
Who would do such a thing for you? I don't have the time for that. If I were to spend my time on you, I'd rather find a new hobby.
What did you say?
Carly snapped back at my words. However, it was Carly's parents who stopped her.
Carly! Enough! Aren't you ashamed of yourself for doing such things?
Dad.
I never thought you would do something like this. Sure, you and Osamand were close, but I never imagined it would lead to this. It's truly shameful. What? Don't say it's shameful.
It is embarrassing. Raymond, I'm so sorry. It's understandable that you can't marry her now, and we won't mind if you call off the engagement.
I too must apologize. I'm truly sorry. Watching her parents apologize to Raymond, Carly seemed to realize the irreparable mistake she had made. Tears streaming, she pleaded with Raymond.
I'm sorry. Please, don't call off the engagement.
I've had enough of you. I can't marry you.
No.
Osamand, witnessing Carly's situation, also begged for my forgiveness. Lena, I'm really sorry. I'll never cheat again. Please, let's not divorce. But I couldn't possibly trust Osamand's words.
Never cheat again? Unbelievable. I'm divorcing you. And I'll be claiming compensation too. Looks like your beloved Carly is getting dumped too, so you two might as well stay together.
No, wait, think this over.
Absolutely not. I can't live with someone like you any longer.
I grabbed the divorce papers again and pushed them toward Osamand.
There's no way we can rebuild from this. If you understand, agree to the divorce now.
Realizing I was serious, Osamand no longer resisted and agreed to the divorce. Finally, I could get away from this man. And I wouldn't have to see Carly's face anymore. This realization brought a smile to my face. A few days later, Osamand and I were officially divorced. I managed to claim compensation from both Osamand and Carly, which was satisfying. Carly and Raymond officially ended their engagement too. Despite the scandal, neither Osamand nor Carly quit their jobs. I thought they might leave their positions due to the divorce and scandal spreading through their companies. However, it seems they couldn't afford to quit, needing to pay the compensation. In a way, that served them right. Thinking so might mean I have a bad personality too. After the divorce was finalized, I apologized to Raymond for ruining the party. But he kindly said, "No worries. Thank you for letting me know about Carly's affair. It was a big help." A year after divorcing Osamand, I'm living comfortably alone, working a new job in a new city. I'm not sure what Osamand and Carly are up to, but the compensation is being deposited monthly, so they must be managing somehow. It seems I'm better off living alone than with someone. I probably won't marry again. I cherish these happy days and plan to continue enjoying my favorite tea alone. Hey, Abigail. Are you really okay? On the morning of the field trip, I asked my granddaughter Abigail. But Abigail replied,
I'm fine. Plus, I'm looking forward to Grandma's delicious sandwiches, so I'm going.
And left the house earlier than usual. I watched Abigail head to school with a prayerful heart. I hope it ends up being a fun day. I couldn't help but wish. But my wish didn't come true. Just 30 minutes later, the worst happened.
Abigail! What happened?
When I opened the door, there stood my granddaughter, who had supposedly left for the field trip earlier, crying with her backpack covered in mud. Then,
Look inside,
she said, offering the backpack filled with a ton of trash. I felt a surge of rage at the tragic sight.
What is this?
As I trembled with anger trying to remove the trash from the backpack.
Is something wrong?
My son Richard, who was working remotely, appeared behind me.
Richard, this.
I said, trying to suppress my anger and disappointment, presenting Abigail's backpack to him. Richard then picked up the trash from the backpack and, "Is this?" murmured with a smile towards Abigail. The next moment,
That's great,
he said.
Yeah, everyone put it in. I was so happy I cried. Now, I'll be late for the field trip if I don't go.
Abigail said, laughing, and went back to school. Left out of the loop, I stood dumbfounded watching Abigail energetically run off. My name is Isabella, a 55-year-old housewife. My husband Kevin and I have been living with our son Richard and granddaughter Abigail for the past 5 months. The reason for our living together was that Richard's wife, Madison, passed away due to illness. Madison had terminal cervical cancer. She always had severe menstrual pains and would often rely on over-the-counter painkillers when feeling unwell. Additionally, she had irregular periods and occasional abnormal bleeding from a young age, which made her insensitive to bodily changes. As a result, by the time she realized something was wrong, it was already too late.
When the hospital called to say she needed to be admitted for treatment immediately, I was in shock.
Richard told me over the phone that Madison had cervical cancer, his voice filled with despair and powerlessness. The shock of the cancer diagnosis was one thing, but in Madison's case, the cancer had already begun to spread to other areas, making surgery impossible. Therefore, they had to try chemotherapy and radiation therapy. However, the treatments did not have the hoped-for effects. Richard's voice became increasingly dark and weak with each phone call. All I could do was listen to my son's stories. And respond. Then, a year ago, Madison quietly passed away in her hospital bed. It happened just 8 months after the cancer was discovered.
If only I had pushed harder for her to go to the gynecologist.
After Madison's death, Richard blamed himself for his indifference to her health and fell into a deep depression. In addition to caring for Abigail, who was in the 1st grade, and managing unfamiliar household tasks, he was overwhelmed both physically and emotionally. Abigail, too, seemed confused by the sudden loss of her mom, occasionally crying at night and refusing to go to school. My husband and I wanted to encourage and support them, so we suggested living together. Initially, Richard was hesitant, but he said,
Having someone always at home might make Abigail feel safer.
Becoming more open to the idea. However, Richard had one major concern about living together. It was that Abigail would have to transfer schools as we moved in together. Richard worried that transferring schools, especially while grieving Madison's death, would be too much of a psychological burden for Abigail. But facing the reality of juggling work, household duties, and childcare, he felt he was reaching his limit. After much deliberation, Richard couldn't come to a decision. So, he decided to ask Abigail herself how she felt about it. "Hey, Abigail. Grandma and Grandpa said they'd like us to live with them at their house. What do you think?"
Live at Grandma and Grandpa's house? I want to go.
"Is that so? It means you'll have to change schools. Is that okay?"
What does change schools mean?
"It means just like moving houses, you'll move to a new school. So, you won't see your current school friends anymore. Is that okay?"
I see. Does Dad want to move?
"Dad is fine with whatever. What you want is most important."
Then I want to move. That means Grandma will always be with me, right?
"Yes, both Grandma and Grandpa will be with you always. So, let's start preparing for the move, okay?" Abigail nodded strongly in agreement to Richard's final confirmation. Thus, my son's family came to live with us. Later on, I learned that Abigail decided to move for Richard's sake. Dad looks so busy with work every day, and he seems really busy with things like my homework and meals. So, I thought it would be easier for Dad if Grandma and Grandpa were with us. When Madison was in critical condition, I had stayed at Richard's house and took over all the household duties. It seems Abigail thought that living with us would reduce Richard's burden based on that experience. Both my husband and I were deeply touched by Abigail's kindness. And so, in place of busy Richard, we gave all our love and time to Abigail. Perhaps because of our efforts, Abigail, who was initially quiet and reserved after moving, gradually began to regain her former brightness. Still, sometimes she would look sadly at classmates chatting happily with their moms during shopping trips or school events. Even if she's putting on a brave face, it must still be hard for her. At that moment, I resolved to do anything I could for Abigail's smile. One day, while shopping at a nearby supermarket, a woman around Richard's age approached me.
Hello. You're Abigail's grandmother, right? I'm the mom of Scarlett, who's in the same class. My daughter always talks about how kind you are.
This woman, who introduced herself as Elizabeth, approached me with a strong perfume scent and a forced smile. I recognized her face, so I knew immediately she was a parent from the same class. However, I didn't have a very good impression of Elizabeth. The reason is, when I attended a school event in place of Richard, Elizabeth and other moms would look at me and Abigail and laugh, sharing rumors. I thought it might be a misunderstanding at first, but the same happened even when Richard attended. I thought she was quite rude. But since we were just classmates' parents and didn't interact much, I decided not to worry about it. Being unexpectedly approached by someone I was not comfortable with.
What should I do? I'm not very fond of this person,
I thought to myself. But thinking of her as my granddaughter's mom, I decided to continue the conversation for a while. Elizabeth then stood in the middle of the supermarket aisle and suddenly started bragging about her family. I can't give you details because it's personal, but my husband is a rising star in a big corporation. So, he earns more than most people. And he's trusted so much by his boss that he's about to get promoted. Is that so? Congratulations.
Plus, my daughter is academically excellent and popular in her class. She was even scouted to be a kids model.
That's impressive. I should be going soon. Thinking it wasn't a conversation worth blocking the supermarket aisle for, I attempted to leave. Then Elizabeth,
just listen till the end, I'm not finished,
raised her voice suddenly. Taken aback by her abrupt change, I involuntarily stopped.
This is why I hate dealing with old people. Anyway, what I'm saying is, your granddaughter is a bad influence, so I'd appreciate it if she didn't associate with my daughter anymore.
Eh? What do you mean?
Abigail's mom died from an illness, right? It's really sad for Abigail, left behind. She still looks sad sometimes. It's like she's spreading unhappiness? Like a walking misfortune?
What are you trying to say?
Basically, Abigail's presence is bothersome.
What are you talking about?
It's a critical time for us. My husband is up for a promotion. So, I've told my daughter not to hang out with Abigail, to avoid catching her bad luck, but Abigail keeps following her around, and it's causing us trouble. Please tell her off firmly.
Elizabeth said that and disappeared into the crowd at the supermarket with a snide smile. I was left standing there, stunned by the cruel content of the conversation and the unexpected event, unable to retort. That evening, when my husband Kevin came home, I told him about what happened at the supermarket.
So, that happened. Maybe Abigail is having a hard time at school? What should we do? Call the teacher? Oh, should we consult with Richard first?
Isabella, calm down. Did any other parents say something like this?
Eh? No, this was the first time.
Then let's just talk to Richard and observe a bit more. We don't want to make a fuss and make Abigail feel worse, right?
But to be told such things? She must be suffering at school. At least, let's ask about how things are at school. Okay?
All right, calm down. I'll bring it up during dinner tonight and see how things go from there. Is that okay?
Yes, please. My husband reluctantly agreed, understanding my feelings. I really wanted to ask Abigail directly. But upon reflection, I might press her too much out of concern if I were to ask. Thinking this, my husband seemed more suited to calmly handle the conversation this time. That night, dinner was just the three of us, as Richard came home late from work. Abigail helped with dinner as usual and enjoyed my cooking, saying it was delicious. From her behavior, it was hard to believe she was having a hard time at school.
Maybe she's hiding it so we won't notice.
For the first time today, I doubted Abigail's actions. And as the meal was coming to an end, I signaled my husband. He cleared his throat and casually asked Abigail, "How's the new school? Are you having fun?" Abigail stopped eating and was silent for a while at the sudden question. Then, in a small voice, "It was fun before, but not so much now," she answered. I thought to myself, I knew it. Then, "What's not fun?" I asked Abigail. Abigail hesitantly began to talk about what was happening at school. Scarlett suddenly said she didn't want to play anymore. She said we couldn't be together during break or when going home from school. According to Abigail, Scarlett had suddenly started ignoring and avoiding her about a month ago. And because of that, other classmates also began to act distant towards Abigail. "Why doesn't Scarlett want to play with you anymore? Did you ask her why?" My husband also asked Abigail, sounding concerned. But it seems Abigail herself couldn't think of any reason. "Maybe everyone hates me now?" Abigail muttered, then cried with big tears rolling down her cheeks.
I may have underestimated how serious the situation was.
I quietly stood up, hugged Abigail, and gently rubbed her back. Then, Richard came home. Surprised by the sight of Abigail crying, my husband explained the conversation during dinner. Richard, somehow very calm, knelt down to match Abigail's gaze and said, "It's okay, Abigail. No matter what, the three of us will protect you." He gently stroked Abigail's head. Then, standing up, he said, "Dad, can I talk to you for a sec?"
and called my husband to another room to start a discussion. Probably about what to do next. Abigail, perhaps touched by Richard's words, began to cry loudly, releasing her pent-up feelings. I held her, letting her cry until she felt better, and strongly wished that these sad tears would only be for today. A few days later, Abigail brought home a letter about an upcoming field trip.
The timing is terrible, knowing she's not getting along with her friends and now a field trip.
The moment I read the letter, I imagined Abigail being alone on the field trip, and remembered the big tears from a few days ago, feeling my heart was about to burst.
Hey, Abigail. Just in case, if you don't want to go on the field trip, you don't have to force yourself.
I shared my thoughts with Abigail before consulting Richard or my husband. I knew it was important to discuss as a family, but I couldn't help worrying about Abigail. Then, after a moment of silence, Abigail said,
I'm okay. I want to go on the field trip because I want to eat Grandma's sandwiches.
And answered with her usual bright smile. That night, Abigail excitedly told her dad and my husband about the field trip. Both smiled and said,
Sounds fun.
But I couldn't shake off my worries. So, on the morning of the day, Hey, Abigail. Are you really okay? I asked again. However, Abigail said,
I'm okay. Plus, I'm looking forward to Grandma's delicious sandwiches, so I'm going.
And left the house earlier than usual. I watched Abigail head to school with a prayerful heart.
Please, let it end as a fun day.
But my wish did not come true. Just 30 minutes later, the worst happened. The doorbell rang and I rushed to the front door in a panic.
Abigail! What happened?
There stood my granddaughter, who had supposedly left for the field trip earlier, crying with her backpack covered in mud. Then, look inside, she said, offering the backpack filled with a ton of trash. The leisure sheet we folded neatly together the night before, the field trip guidebook we colored cutely, and the sandwiches I made that morning were all buried under the trash and not visible. I felt a surge of intense anger at the tragic sight.
What is this?
As I trembled with anger trying to remove the trash from the backpack.
Is something wrong?
My son Richard, who was working remotely, appeared behind me. Despite everything, Richard was worried about Abigail too. Unusually for him, he had said, I'll work remotely today, and stayed in the living room from the morning to keep an eye on Abigail. And after Abigail left, he seemed restless and couldn't concentrate on his work. Richard must have been hoping that Abigail would enjoy the field trip and return home happily. But instead, this happened.
Richard, this,
I said, trying to suppress my anger and despair while presenting Abigail's backpack to him. Then Richard picked up the trash from the backpack and,
Is this?
Murmured with a smile towards Abigail. The next moment,
That's great,
he said. I was confused by Richard's incomprehensible behavior, almost raising my voice in confusion. However, Abigail, just like Richard, laughed and said,
Yeah, everyone put it in. I was so happy I cried. Now, I'll be late for the field trip if I don't go.
And went back to school. Left out of the loop, I stood dumbfounded watching Abigail energetically run off. Richard then told me,
We've taken care of it, it's going to be okay now.
And smiled gently before going upstairs. My head was still full of unanswered questions. But I didn't want to disturb Richard while he was working, so I silently started to clean up the dishes in the living room. I don't really understand, but I'm just glad Abigail could smile. At that moment, I was happier to see Abigail's smile than to resolve my own questions. Since Richard said,
It's going to be okay,
I thought I could talk to him later at leisure. I felt a sense of relief for the first time in days and felt lighter. After finishing the chores, I unusually dozed off on the living room sofa. When I woke up, it was an hour before Abigail's return.
Oh no! I slept so much. I have to do the laundry, prepare the bath, and make dinner.
I hurried to finish the chores and was preparing dinner when, as expected, Abigail returned home. As usual, the doorbell rang. And I responded with, "Coming." But the scene displayed on the screen made me tense up again. There was a man with a regretful face, a girl who looked like she might start crying any moment, and Elizabeth with a very unhappy face. In a panic, I called for Richard upstairs. Surprised but calm, Richard first opened the door and warmly welcomed Abigail.
Welcome back.
With a smile. Abigail returned the smile just like in the morning. "I'm home," she answered and jumped into Richard's arms. Watching Richard and the others. "Nice to meet you, I'm Scarlett's dad."
May I have a moment of your time?
The unfamiliar man spoke in a weak voice. Richard quietly responded, "Please, come in," and welcomed the three of them to the entrance. Indeed, this man was Scarlett's dad, and the girl was Abigail's classmate, Scarlett. Upon entering, Scarlett's dad immediately started to apologize deeply. "I'm truly sorry for my wife's disgraceful actions that deeply hurt your daughter." Next to him, "I'm sorry, Abigail." Scarlett also tearfully apologized. Scarlett's dad then continued to explain the situation. It turns out Scarlett was popular among her friends, and Elizabeth took pride in that. However, when Abigail transferred to the school, she quickly became the center of attention in the class. Scarlett didn't mind this and would often talk about Abigail to Elizabeth. Elizabeth then said,
Just because she's a transfer student, she's getting too much attention. Using the fact that she doesn't have a mom to garner sympathy from everyone, what a mean girl. Scarlett is the star of the class. I'll make sure she realizes that.
And she told Scarlett,
Listen, Scarlett. Abigail is actually a very mean girl. You shouldn't hang out with her. Make sure to tell this to your classmates too and suggest that everyone stops playing with Abigail. Got it? You can do it, right?
I really wanted to keep playing with Abigail. But if I broke the promise, Mom would punish me. Scarlett clung to her dad's arm and earnestly shared her feelings. It later turned out that the punishment Scarlett mentioned involved Elizabeth hitting her on the head, back, or buttocks. Scarlett was just scared of the punishment and had been following Elizabeth's orders. Elizabeth, who had been controlling Scarlett through violence, didn't expect what happened next. Not a single one of Scarlett's classmates accepted her suggestion. Instead, wanting to cheer up Abigail, who was mourning her mom, they secretly collected empty snack boxes with points for Abigail's favorite character merchandise. Unaware of this, Abigail had been concerned about her classmates whispering and hiding things from her. A few days ago during dinner, "Maybe everyone hates me. That's why," she tearfully told us. But in reality, Abigail wasn't disliked by anyone. On the contrary, the kids had come up with the idea to surprise her with gifts on the field trip day. Abigail went to school earlier than usual that day because her classmates had called her out for the surprise. When she arrived in the classroom, her classmates filled her backpack with those empty boxes.
Wow, thank you, everyone. Oh, I need to tell Dad and Grandma about this. I'll be right back.
Abigail excitedly left the classroom, clutching her backpack. But she tripped and fell at the shoe lockers, getting her backpack covered in mud. That's when Scarlett happened to pass by.
Abigail, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm just going to go home for a bit.
A forgotten item?
No, look, isn't it amazing?
Scarlett remembered the classmate's surprise gift upon seeing inside Abigail's backpack.
I'm going to show it to Grandma and Dad.
Seeing Abigail's beaming smile, Scarlett wanted to do something for her too. So she said, "Oh, wait. You're hurt, so let me put this on you," and offered to put her cherished character Band-Aid on Abigail's knee.
Really? Isn't this your treasure?
It's okay. Because Abigail is an important friend.
Thank you. I'll rush over and show you, or else we'll be late for the field trip.
On her way home, Abigail seemed moved by everyone's kindness, tears overflowing. I saw Abigail, muddy backpack and all, crying, and thought she had a terrible time at school. But to think such a wonderful thing was happening. Both Richard and I were moved by this wonderful event and found ourselves in tears.
Scarlett really loves you. So, if you don't mind, please play with Scarlett again. We'd really appreciate it.
Scarlett's dad said this and then apologized deeply once more. Your feelings have come across clearly, so please, no need for apologies. Abigail, you can make up with Scarlett, right?
Yeah. Scarlett is an important friend.
Afterward, I'm so sorry, they said, apologizing repeatedly as the three of them went home. Throughout this conversation, Elizabeth didn't say a word. She glared at us the entire time with a look of dissatisfaction.
To hurt a child and not even apologize.
I thought Elizabeth was rude and selfish for just standing there without apologizing. But I was about to learn that wasn't the case. What? Scarlett's dad is Kevin's subordinate? After Abigail went to bed, I reported the evening's events to my husband, along with Richard. It was then, from Richard and my husband, that I heard the true story. According to Richard, the realization that Scarlett's dad was my husband's subordinate came from a casual conversation at a school event. But thinking it would be awkward to bring it up, he decided to let it go. Dad's job and me are entirely separate. But when it comes to Abigail, it's a different story. A few nights before, after seeing Abigail in tears, Richard told my husband about Scarlett's dad. The next day, my husband called Scarlett's dad to discuss what had happened. Scarlett's dad promptly checked the facts with Elizabeth and Scarlett. And upon finding out my husband's story was true, he rushed to finish his work and came to our house to apologize.
So that's why Elizabeth was glaring. But it turns out she's decent after all.
He's very serious and trustworthy, both in his work and character. Maybe even too serious. We'll have to support him, as it might get tough from here on. Just as my husband had secretly predicted, Elizabeth and her husband ended up divorcing soon after. However, since Elizabeth was a housewife,
if you want a divorce, you'll need to ensure my lifestyle. And I'll never give up Scarlett's custody. I need $5,000 a month for living and child support. If you can't pay, no divorce.
She demanded unreasonable conditions. Scarlett's dad consulted a lawyer and began gathering evidence to make the divorce favorable for him. It then came to light that Elizabeth had been cheating with a man she met on a dating app. Elizabeth was obsessed with her affair partner, but suddenly, she could no longer contact him. After being blocked from messaging and calls, Elizabeth was always irritated. And that irritation gradually turned into excessive expectations for Scarlett.
You have to be the best at lessons and school. If you fail, there will be consequences.
Scarlett worked hard and diligently met Elizabeth's expectations. Yet, Elizabeth continued to punish her for unreasonable reasons regularly. This was officially recognized, and Scarlett's custody was granted to her dad. He even demanded compensation for the affair, and Elizabeth, now working part-time, is struggling to pay it. After this event, a pleasant change occurred in our home. Abigail, who previously only had my husband and me to play with after school, now had a playmate. And that was Scarlett. To be honest, I didn't have a very good image of Scarlett. But after the divorce was finalized and she was freed from Mom's control, Scarlett turned out to be a very kind and considerate child. Above all, Abigail's joyful smile when playing with Scarlett said everything. Since then, Abigail and Scarlett have been playing together almost every day. I am now very happy to see Abigail's smile every day, something I've always wished for. And I plan to continue pouring unwavering love into Abigail, hoping this happiness lasts forever.